Madam Chair, you have the 1 point.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Big Cypress Basin Board. And I'd like to call the meeting to order. If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. As a reminder, today's proceedings are also accessible via Zoom, as well as Collier TV and the South Florida Water Management District's website. Board members, a gentle reminder that when speaking, please use the buttons on the dais. And also, when recognized, please check your microphones and speak clearly so everyone can hear you. For those here in person, if you would like to comment on an agenda item, please complete a speaker form in the lobby and bring it up to Mr. Troy Miller, who's sitting on my right. If you're joining by Zoom, use the raise the hand feature and staff will call on you. If you're participating by phone, use *9 to raise your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes your phone. With that, we'll go on to agenda revisions. Lisa Keeler, do you have any changes to our agenda? Okay, great. I don't think your microphone is on.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. We're all set. Abstentions by board members from items on the agenda. I'm going to ask each of you if you have any abstentions for today's meeting. Vice Chair Waters? I have none. Mr. Hill?
I have none.
Ms. Rivera?
None.
Okay, great. All right, approval of the minutes for the July 8th Big Cypress Basin Board meeting. If there are no corrections or additions, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the July 8th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Hill. Is there a second?
I'll second, ma'am.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters seconds. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. General public comment. We're now to the first session of public comment. There are 2 opportunities during the meeting to address anything that's not on the agenda. The public had an opportunity to provide written comments also prior to this meeting, and we received several written comments, and they will be posted with the meeting materials on the district's website. We'll start with anyone who is here in person for public comment, and then we'll move to the electronic media. Troy, is there anyone signed up for public comment?
I have no one here in the room signed up on this item, and no one online has raised their hand at this point, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on then to our first discussion item on the agenda, which is the Picayune Watershed Water Quality Siting Analysis, the presentation of the final report. We'll go ahead and begin with Kyle Goodwin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Kyle Goodwin, Senior Project Manager with Stantec here in Naples. We're here today to present the Picune Watershed Water Quality Site Analysis. Thank you. I first would like to recognize and thank the many organizations who participated throughout the development of this analysis. The public and private entities shown on the slide here represent members of the technical working group. Some of them are here today, and they've been instrumental in providing input and feedback, much of which has been incorporated into the report. Speaking with me today, I have 2 of my Stantec colleagues. One is Amanda Ludlow. She's a principal and subject matter expert in nature-based treatment solutions, and Tim Hancock, who's also a principal and subject matter expert in public outreach efforts and engagement efforts in environmental projects across the United States. With that, today, we'll first start off with reviewing the water quality feasibility study, which was the initial project done. Then we'll follow up with reviewing the water quality site analysis with its summary, and then leave some room there for questions. At this point, I'm going to turn over to Tim, who will provide an overview of the water quality feasibility study.
Thank you, Kyle. And good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm going to start things off with a quick overview of the steps in the feasibility study, which really led up to the site analysis that is the primary focus for today. The purpose of the feasibility study was to identify a suite of alternatives that, when applied, would result in water quality improvements for downstream outstanding Florida waters. Key considerations were existing and future flow patterns, and an emphasis was placed on applications and technologies proven effective in Southwest Florida. To help orient you regarding the flow changes resulting from the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, or PSRP, you can see here on the left image some existing flow patterns. BR 36 located right here and BR 37 here are existing culverts under US 41 that allow for sheet flow from natural areas as well as existing permitted discharges that occur north of US 41. The image on the right is intended to show the changes in flows from the PSRP. First, we'll see an increased sheet flow from the north and east as a result of the project. Additionally, the Southwest Florida protection feature shown here in orange is required to protect the existing significant agricultural operations in the area and will result in channelization of some upstream discharges. In addition to BR 36 here and BR 37 here, a new set of culverts will be placed in this approximate location to accommodate the change in surface flows. The goal of the feasibility study was to help determine not only the best potential applications for improved water quality, but also the preferred location for those improvements as well. Our first step was to review background materials totaling more than 150 sources, including many recommended or provided by the technical working group. This data helped inform the study methodology, and ultimately there are more than 20 different treatment options that were reviewed and analyzed for potential application. Throughout the course of the study, we conducted 17 meetings with the technical working group, or TWG, with each meeting building on the last, providing project updates, case studies, and proposed treatment technologies, including process schematics. These meetings provided a free-flowing opportunity for exchange of ideas and information, and we greatly appreciate the time and commitment each member of the technical working group made to this project and the resulting impacts of their collective input. I'm going to now turn things back over to Amanda Ludlow, or for the first time to Amanda, to review the challenges and results of the feasibility study.
Thanks, Tim. So development of treatment solutions requires evaluation of numerous factors, as shown here, each of which is discussed in more detail in the feasibility study. During the information collection stage, various treatment technologies were identified for project applicability. Each technology, as well as their pros and cons, are documented in the information collection summary report. Based upon this review, the most feasible technologies were narrowed down to the ones shown here in bold. These technologies were then further evaluated to assess the treatment potential based upon available land for construction. Freedom Park in Naples is an example of a successful treatment sequence to improve water quality to the impaired Gordon River and reduce nutrient loads to Naple Bay. Water is pumped from the stormwater culvert into a 4-acre settling pond, then flows into 6 acres of treatment wetlands, 3 in series, composed of a series of shallow marshes and deep open water ponds. Discharge from the treatment wetlands then enters over 11 acres of restored natural wetlands before discharging to the Gordon River and ultimately to the bay. Performance monitoring has demonstrated over 41% removal of nitrogen and over 80% removal of phosphorus, with influent concentrations very similar to the water quality observed in the Tamiami Canal. The park has numerous trails and boardwalks throughout the treatment system, allowing visitors access to experience the habitat created and utilized by aquatic wildlife and wading birds. To maximize treatment potential, recommended technologies were combined into treatment sequences and evaluated based upon the 6 criteria listed here. A higher ranking reflects better performance, smaller area, less operation and maintenance, lower cost, shorter time frame for implementation, and longer lifespan. As shown here, the preferred option was option B in ranking the highest. One of the major benefits of this treatment sequence is the focus of intercepting water at or near BR 36. This is also upgrading of where the additional flows from the PSRP are expected to enter the canal. Therefore, interception of flow at BR 36 prior to dilution would reduce the total volume of water requiring treatment. Water would then be pumped to a sedimentation basin for removal of suspended solids, as well as those contaminants absorbed to those particulates. We know from the surface water sampling that more than half of the nutrient concentrations within the canal are associated with these suspended particulates. Effluent from the basin would then flow through a series of treatment wetlands with a combination of open water ponds and shallow marshes. Fine sediment and dissolved contaminants will be removed in the shallow marshes through filtration, sedimentation, adsorption, burial, and biodegradation processes. Effluent from the treatment wetlands would then be diverted into a spreader swale for conveyance and dispersion of flow to an area of existing wetlands, helping to restore freshwater flows. This sequence would alleviate the migration of contaminant loads to downgradient resources, both within the canal as well as those lands south of Route 41, which ultimately receive flow from the canal via existing and planned culverts. I will now pass it over to Kyle.
All right, within the project scope, there were several recommendations that were presented in the study. The most cost-effective solution to improve water quality is to treat the highest concentration with the lowest flow. Additionally, existing data shows that the highest concentrations are located at or near BR 36. And therefore, the project should intercept water at or near BR 36, pending any new sampling results. The project should utilize a passive sequence of nature-based solutions, similar to what Amanda just went through. The project should be sited within 20 to 55 acres, and again, ideally near BR 36. And lastly, note that the potential parcel areas at this time were both public, private, as well as agriculturally zoned. So there was a lot of variation there. While developing the feasibility study, it was recognized that there were several recommendations that should be included, even though they did not relate to the scope of work. First, perform flow modeling, additional flow modeling and additional water quality monitoring to properly size the project. Also, pursue land partnerships, both public and private, and identify one or more stakeholders to not only lead this effort, but to also support pursuit of funding. Throughout the development of the feasibility study, over 150 sources of documents were reviewed, over 20 treatment options were analyzed, 9 stakeholder organizations participated in the 17 TWG meetings. These organizations included federal, state, local agencies, as well as nonprofits and agricultural entities. Over 250 people engaged during 3 public information meetings, and several news articles were published about the project. All of these efforts have channeled into the feasibility study, which helps to inform decisions moving forward, provides flexible and adaptable treatment options, and is written for multiple scenarios. So once a candidate site is identified, the most appropriate alternative could be applied. Lastly, it includes several recommendations for related water quality improvement efforts. Now I will turn it over to Tim to review the water quality site analysis.
Thank you, Kyle. So basically now we have a project. We have a treatment methodology. We have an approximate size. All we're missing is a home. So the next step was a siting analysis study. So the siting analysis study, the goals were very simple. It was to identify and assess candidate parcels within the study area and come back to you with a recommendation that would help achieve the project's water quality goals. For today's presentation, if you think we've covered a lot so far, we're about to get into the meat of the sandwich. So there's a lot of information here. We're going to cover it fairly quickly, but certainly look forward to any questions you may have when we're done. The methodology developed included identifying an initial search area. We then applied exclusionary criteria in 2 separate rounds, identifying land that was not suitable for the project, and then moved to a more evaluative stage. Following that, property records research and legal review of each remaining parcel. This would result in an initial partial ranking that was presented to the technical working group, followed by additional analysis. The updated ranked parcels were then subjected to a heightened level of review and ranking, resulting in a final recommendation that you see today. As mentioned, the initial study area was expanded well beyond the core project area to ensure that all viable options were reviewed. This study area you see here includes 1,935 individual parcels, covering the full area. For reference, BR 36 and 37, as well as the proposed new culverts under US 41, are in that yellow oval in the center of the study area. We then applied an initial set of exclusionary criteria. These were the easy ones, the low-hanging fruit. If the property lies within the Everglades Restoration Project, it was excluded. Parcels that are zoned and developed planned unit development, they too were excluded. Land developed or in active agricultural use, And any parcel that when combined with adjacent eligible parcels could not meet a minimum acreage of 15 acres was also excluded. We're going to walk you through a map progression that basically walks through that process. So here are the parcels in green that are in the Everglades restoration area. Therefore, they were excluded from further consideration. Next, the light blue shows all parcels zoned plan unit development. They too were excluded. As most of you know, PUD zoning, even on undeveloped lands, indicates varying degrees of entitlement and investment, making acquisition potentially more difficult and costly. Now, they're shown in light blue here, but you'll notice the one on the bottom with a little hatching here. During the feasibility study, that parcel was identified as one that there may be an opportunity to work with the landowner down the road. Therefore, it was included for further consideration. The next level, as you see here in tan, these are lands that are either developed with existing homes, nursery or agricultural operations, or active agricultural production. Again, they're in light tan. The next progression were all parcels that could not meet the minimum size criteria of 15 acres or more when combined with adjacent parcels, and they too were excluded. So all parcels not meeting that initial list of exclusionary criteria are shown here in brown. It totaled 116 individual parcels. At this stage, our team met with Basin and Collier County staff at the Basin offices and individually reviewed every single one of those parcels in a tabletop exercise. From this tabletop review, additional exclusionary criteria were developed and applied. That included surface flow characteristics, physical connectivity, and presence of mangrove or salt marsh areas. So again, applying those in order. Regarding surface flow, obviously the goal of the project is to intercept primary flows from the PSRP prior to discharge. The parcels shown in light purple here, mainly to the left, were unable due to physical location to really accept that water without substantial infrastructure, so they were excluded. Next, parcels with significant public or private infrastructure that would create a physical barrier to the project were identified and removed. Those are mainly in dark purple here, located in section 16. Many of these would have required crossing private easements or rights of way that we don't have right to do, as well as crossing parcels that were developed or in active agricultural use. Next, a salt marsh area is inconsistent with the project goals, which are to intercept freshwater flows from the Picayune, remove nutrients, and discharge that treated water downstream. This is incompatible with salt marsh areas. Those areas were mapped and shown in yellow here and were further excluded. So as this map illustrates, from the original nearly 2,000 parcels, after the application of two sets of exclusionary criteria, 10 parcels or parcel groups remained. These 10 parcels would now undergo a more detailed assessment and evaluation. And again, for sake of reference, BR 36, 37, and the new culverts are shown within the orange oval in the center of this graphic. The next phase of study was a more subjective evaluation process, applying additional criteria for scoring and ranking purposes. Much like we did previously, we'll briefly walk you through each criteria and discuss the scoring. First, the scoring criteria dealt with hydraulic distance, not an overly difficult element to understand. The closer a parcel or parcel group is to the primary source flows, facilitating picking those up at BR 36 or 37, the higher it would score, 7 being the best score, 1 being the lowest based on central proximity. Next, using district wetland maps, we identified the largest contiguous upland portion on each parcel or parcel group for scoring. Now, since the proposed project will need to be elevated to some degree to perform its function, also against protection for sea level rise, uplands are more likely to improve system function over the use of wetlands. In addition, it reduces impacts and permitting issues. The largest contiguous or nearly contiguous upland areas were aggregated and scored, with the lowest starting at 15 acres and going upwards to 150 acres. During this exercise, two parcels or parcel groups, parcel group 10 and parcel 1474, were determined to not have the 15 acres of minimum upland required and were therefore removed from further consideration. The next was scoring for ease of access. Parcels where the upland areas that are aggregated have direct and proximate access from a publicly available road or easement were scored highest. If the access was considerable distance, as shown in the example here, or that distance covered an area of sensitive wildlife or vegetation areas, or crossed water bodies or canals, it would score much lower. The access issue is obviously critical, not just for construction, but long-term maintenance as well. And lastly, our subconsultant Rutzel and Andrus reviewed the titles and deed restrictions for each of the remaining parcels and found that none specifically prohibited the proposed use. Each parcel does, however, carry with it a varying level of regulatory complexity and permitting from local to state to federal. So each remaining parcel was then scored based on general land use complexity required to permit the project. Each of these remaining 8 parcels, remember 2 dropped out due to not having sufficient upland areas. Each of these 8 remaining parcels were scored and ranked, and the top 5 parcels are shown here in both table and map form. We then presented this body of work to the technical working group for their review and input on December 17th, 2021. And I can tell you the TWG did not disappoint. We got plenty of input. Received suggestions and information from them that actually helped better inform our data. So we reviewed that information and revised each parcel scoring accordingly. And I'd like to run over those key issues here with you. Key among them were number 1, the 2004 Collier Seminole State Park Unit Management Plan contained information about the significance and rarity of the rockland hammock habitat within the park. This habitat was in fact a driver for the creation of Collier Seminole State Park. Once we removed all the rockland hammock areas from those upland considerations, parcels 1343 down here and parcel 1443 now fell below the 15-acre minimum for upland habitat and were therefore removed. Also within that 2004 unit management plan, information for an area known as the bicycle seat, incredibly creative name for something shaped like a bicycle seat, was identified here as a part of this parcel. And the unit management plan referred to it as being rural in nature and containing some of the highest elevations in the park. As a result, parcel 1207, or specifically the bicycle seat, was pulled back in for further evaluation. Following conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers also, the possibility of properties on the edge of the SERP potentially being removed from the SERP if they were not performing a vital function was discussed, and the opportunity may be there for that to happen. The reason that's important is just north of BR 36 in this triangle you see here, parcel group 13, the lower half of that was in the SERP. However, if it could be removed from the SERP and combined with the parcels to the north, it is in a strategic location, and it now also provides a minimum acreage exceeding 15 acres and therefore was pulled into consideration. And lastly, parcel group 6 up here at the top of your map was determined really to be too far hydraulically removed from the core area and was excluded. Similarly, parcel 8 here was also ranked accordingly and dropped in its ranking scores as well. So thanks to the TWG and that input, we had a reassessment and a re-ranking, which resulted in what you see here. These parcels resulted in the ranking of 5 parcels remaining for further consideration and evaluation. And here they are in map form. And specifically, these parcels are parcel 803, right here, a former ag field held in private ownership, parcel 1920, which is part of the Fiddler's Creek PUD. It is currently undergoing a land use change, by the way, for this parcel. And my understanding is there are some conversations that may be happening there. Parcel 1207 or more, 1207, excuse me, or more specifically the bicycle seat, as well as parcel group 13, just north of 41 near BR 36, and parcel group 8, which is really an assemblage of a high number of small residentially used, primarily residentially used parcels within section 16. So with the parcels narrowed to 5 remaining candidate parcels, we then applied a secondary set of evaluative criteria, which included an ecological analysis, assessment of capital project cost, water quality benefits, potential for public use or public asset, and ease of acquisition. Regarding ecological factors, we requested a consent of entry from all parcel owners. The result was mixed. We got okay from some, we got a lot of non-responses, and a few saying it was fine. As a result, we performed a cursory site walk where possible, and where not possible, we performed observations from the nearest vantage point to develop a more detailed assessment of the ecological conditions of each parcel. Each was then scored, and as you can imagine, lands having a high degree of native vegetation or habitat were scored poorly, and those that were fairly clear of native vegetation or minimal habitat would score well. At this point, I'm going to turn things back over to Amanda and Kyle to go into the next elements of the evaluative criteria.
So the next step was to develop conceptual schematics for each candidate parcel. Each schematic includes interception of flow at or near BR 36, again, the area of highest concentrations, and it's also upgrading of any dilution effects from the PSRP, then pumping of that water and conveying it to a candidate treatment parcel, followed by passive treatment by the recommended treatment sequence as per the feasibility study. And then depending on the conditions of that candidate parcel, discharge to either an existing surface drainage feature or via creation of a spreader swale. And then finally to discharge to existing wetlands. Here's an example of that treatment sequence, that treatment schematic. Again, interception of flow at or near BR 36 and pumping of that water to the candidate treatment parcel, where water would first enter a sedimentation basin for initial settling of solids, and then into a series of surface flow treatment wetlands for additional solids removal and removal of those dissolved constituents, and then discharge to either an existing surface drainage feature or via creation of a spreader swale, and finally to existing wetlands. So in order to evaluate water quality benefits, each parcel was scored based upon the estimated total mass of nitrogen and phosphorus removed per year for each parcel. The parcel with the highest mass removal would result in the highest water quality score, while the parcel with the least mass removal will receive the lowest water quality score. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to talk about the next criteria.
Based on the schematic designs reviewed by Amanda, capital costs were roughly estimated for each parcel and scored accordingly to this table for the purposes of comparison. Capital costs include land acquisition, survey, permitting, design, construction oversight, and 10 years of O&M costs. This allowed us to provide a relative comparison of project costs with 3 of the 5 remaining parcels scoring similarly. Additionally, while the main objective of this project is water quality, projects such as Freedom Park demonstrate the ability to combine ecologically beneficial projects with public use, recreation, and education. Therefore, parcels that were isolated or would have limited opportunity for public access or use were scored low, whereas those within an existing use area and a high ability to have educational components were scored highest, as shown on the scoring table. And lastly, the ability to acquire land for this project is key to ensuring the project has the potential to be designed and implemented in advance of the PSRP. Like most public projects, a willing seller makes this not only easier, but potentially much less costly. Considering this, private parcels where the owner has indicated no intention of selling or conveying the land were scored the lowest, whereas publicly owned lands with minimal restrictions were scored the highest. On this slide, we're showing the final ranking table. The application of the second set of evaluative criteria just described resulted in this final parcel ranking table. The table includes all evaluative criteria scores, both primary and secondary, for each parcel or parcel area. Of note, parcels 803, 1207, and 1920 are closely grouped and scored highly. Parcel groups 13 and 8 lag significantly for different reasons. Switching to a map of the view of rankings, the highest 3 ranked parcels are shown here on the south of US 41. The final report and ranking was presented to the TWG for their review. Their review resulted in no fewer than 228 individual comments representing 10 organizations. The vast majority of these comments could be lumped into one of 3 categories. The first being ranking criteria. For example, should public access be ranked? Should it be weighted or excluded? Should certain criteria be weighted? We felt that these decisions were best made at the policy level and not appropriate for our team to make. Therefore, we used an unweighted approach and used criteria commonly utilized in successful demonstrated water quality projects elsewhere. A second group of comments centered on calculations and analysis of flows. While much effort went into understanding the potential for each system to remove contaminants and nutrients from reaching downstream OFWs, most parcels scored similarly since we limited the model to 35 acres. Through our efforts, we discovered a significant drop-off in effectiveness beyond this size project. Also, once a parcel is selected and a design is put in place, that would be the most appropriate time for an additional analysis of the system function. And the third group of comments centered on additional considerations. One example included location preferences. While there were certainly those that felt locating the project on publicly owned lands are inadvisable, we felt that it was appropriate to include and assess all viable parcels, regardless of ownership, and let the district apply the appropriate policy directives in these areas. And now I will turn it back over to Amanda, who will present on multiple parcel sequencing, which in our opinion is one of the key potential features that came out of this analysis.
So in addition to evaluating each parcel independently, we had the opportunity to evaluate solutions which utilize multiple parcels. One opportunity was immediately identified at parcel group 13, specifically the southern half, in which we could passively intercept flow from the canal and convey it to an initial collection pond. This pond would provide initial detention of flow, which would promote sedimentation of nutrient-laden solids, but also reduce the amount of water which could bypass capture and thus treatment from a simple pumping approach. Incorporation of this collection pond would reduce maintenance needs at the subsequent treatment parcel by providing pre-treatment of flow before that parcel. This location is immediately adjacent to Route 41, which also simplifies access for maintenance. Ultimately, all of these benefits improve the function and longevity of the treatment solution at the candidate parcel. These provide some examples of how multiple parcel sequencing could function. So starting with a collection pond and conveyance of flow to parcel 1920 or 1207, but it can also include distributing the flow between multiple parcels. So going from parcel 13 to 1207 and 1920 or 803 and 1920. Splitting the flow between parcels could either increase the total flow captured or reduce the size of each treatment sequence on each parcel, all of which requires additional analyses into determining the ideal flow rate to intercept in order to maximize contaminant mass removal most efficiently. So as part of our reviews with the technical working group, concern was raised over the assumed water quality within the canal. Our estimates were based upon the PSRP report, which provided estimated nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations from 2004 to 2013. As per the working group's recommendations, we reviewed more recent data collected from the canal from 2015 through 2022, with annual means of phosphorus and nitrogen shown here. These means confirm use of the previous water quality results are consistent with the more recent quality sampling results. But please note the increase in the phosphorus as shown here in 2022. And in 2022, sampling has only been conducted in April, May, and June. The higher concentration shown here is driven by sampling conducted in April, May. Subsequent sampling conducted in June confirmed phosphorus concentrations were reduced back to the previous levels. These observations suggest additional monitoring of not only nutrient concentrations, but concurrent to flow monitoring will be critical with design development for any candidate parcel. And now I'm going to pass it to Tim.
My first question is, are you still with us? Okay. If it feels a little bit like you're drinking through a fire hose, that's understood. It's a lot of information. It's about 2.5 years worth of work, but I promise you, we're in the home stretch. So after nearly 2 years and 2 separate but complementary studies, where are we today? And I will do my best to keep my phone from making any more noise. First, the objective to identify treatment applications to improve downstream water quality for the OFWs, that has been accomplished. We have a clear idea of what the final treatment system solutions and elements should be as part of a nature-based solution. Secondly, we know the greatest nutrient loads with the lowest flow volume exist at or near BR36. As a result, again, we've identified that as a primary source for intercepting of water to treat the flows from the PSRP. Also, of the 1,935 parcels reviewed, we have not only one parcel to recommend to you, we have 3. And each has its own unique characteristics. And I'll tell you, I've done many of these studies, some of them starting with 20,000 parcels. And if we get to 1, sometimes we're happy. Here we have 3. Parcel 803, the triangle at the top here, is in an ideal location. The property owners indicated to date no willingness to sell the property, but nonetheless, the property remains a viable candidate. Parcel 1920, a little further away from BR36, which sits right about here. However, the property owner has at least indicated a willingness to speak with us and sit down and discuss the project going forward. And then parcel 1207, specifically the bicycle seat here, which actually comes very close to touching the US 41 area here. It's ideally located, but does lie within a state park. Now, no particular use in the management plan is designated for this land, but some funding is currently being considered in the coming budget year for a degree of remediation. So in summary, you have 3 good candidate parcels for the project, and the decision regarding which parcel or parcels best meet the goals of the project really now becomes one of a policy decision we feel is best made at the district level. And it should be noted, of course, that the rankings provided, I'll go back, and the rankings provided in this report are based on considerations and calculations made at a conceptual level of design. There will be further refinement going forward once a preferred parcel is selected clearly. So that detailed analysis should and will occur through final design, but we're very confident that the project objectives can be achieved on any one of these parcels. We also, again, want to emphasize, we think that regardless of the final project location, the consideration of a collection pond just north of US 41 near BR 36 should be a part of any consideration going forward to help the project achieve its ultimate objectives. We also suggest, again, the parcel sequencing. The nice thing is we can look at this as what's the easiest and best way to get to the next step and have a material impact on water quality downstream in stage one. But as we get more and more data over time, it may warrant additional considerations. And therefore, I wouldn't close any of the doors until they're absolutely closed, because it gives you the right and opportunity to come back later and obtain additional treatment sequencing and operations. During final design, environmental studies and surveys will be performed at a detailed level to better inform the final project design as well. And we want to bring your attention, there's a potential for a water quality project in the US 41 Canal that your staff is working with FDOT on. We'd like to see that happen on a conceptual level. We think it's great. Any approach, incremental or otherwise, is welcome, but we certainly think that should be undertaken as a parallel effort. And lastly, and yes, I did say lastly, we also recommend that a water quality monitoring program be implemented to help identify nutrient sources, as well as fully capture potential contributions and loading scenarios so that future adjustments can be made. One of the nice things about projects like this is they can be tweaked and adjusted going forward. You can phase them in such a way that you can react and respond to changing conditions. What we have right now are models. What we will have is reality in the not too distant future. And that reality will help us inform future design and augmentation. Source control also came up many times during the course of these two studies. And again, while it was not a part of our scope of services, we believe continued stakeholder engagement and cooperation in the area of source control is certainly worth supporting. So in summary, what you've heard today is there's not one silver bullet out there that's going to solve the water quality issues in this area, but pursuing the measures outlined today in parallel over time, we will see significant improvements in downstream water quality, which will advance the goals and protect the interests of all residents and businesses in the region. And on behalf of our team, I want to thank you for the opportunity to work on a project as meaningful and important as this one, and the opportunity to bring those ideas and direction forward to you with the help and assistance of the technical working group. And with that, we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that you took all of those discussions that we've been in the process of having with the technical working group over 2+ years now, and making it a high-level report for the board and for the public. And as you can see, there's a lot that goes into this, and I think you can appreciate that. And I want to thank you, Tim and Amanda and Kyle, and all of the members of the technical working group who have been engaged. I mean, when you get over 200 comments back on a proposed plan or a tentative report or just feedback because we needed it, that's an incredible amount of engagement. And I'm just very, very, very pleased with the level of engagement from everyone, including also the Basin staff and also the district staff as well, because I've been on those calls and I've listened to those comments, and it's been very, very impressive to this point. And the Picayune Watershed Water Quality Feasibility Study was a part of the district's support for us looking at a water quality component for the Picayune watershed. This piece, the siting analysis, was a Basin lead item, and we hand off and we're working together in partnership to get it done for water quality and for improvement of our waters flowing into outstanding Florida waters that go south into Collier Seminole State Park, Rookery Bay, and impact the coastal waters and the quality of those waters. And I might add, incredibly fertile shark fisheries that are there in Faca Union Bay, in Pumpkin Bay, and I got the third bay. What, Tim, do you got that? Anybody got that off the head? There's 3 bays there that are incredible for our fisheries research. And so I want to thank everyone who's brought us to this point. So with that, board members, are there any questions for the Stantec consulting team at this point?
Uh,
Go ahead.
I have a couple comments. First, I'm going to give you an A on the presentation. I know how complex this information was. Excellent job in summarizing in a little over 30 minutes. Very well done. Thank you. Public use of this, wherever this may end up going, I just had, this is a comment, doesn't need to be responded to. The allowing public use of this, bike trails, walking, whatever it may be, I think it could be a great resource to help move this forward. The second thing I would comment that Madam Chair just spoke to this in general. I would add the economic value of the receiving waters in the 10,000 islands is significant. If you want to put dollars, like I put dollar signs on everything, that's what I do for a living. I think is really important. And that was, I think, outside the boundaries of this study, but I'll just make that for public record. And then the last thing, and I don't mean to be negative on such a positive presentation, but I did want to ask, what would be the impact if we do nothing and allow all these nutrients to get into the 10,000 islands and areas that I like to fish? That I know we already have some algae issues. I can only imagine, well, where's the future go if we don't do anything today? And we have development, we have this, we have that. What's your thoughts if nothing happens, please?
In a simple phrase, things get worse and they get worse fast. And here's why. When you look at the Picayune Strand Restoration Project and you're taking an old point source discharge and spreading that discharge out over a larger landmass, you're going to get some nutrient uptake. What you're really doing is you're shifting the nutrient load from one heavily concentrated area to a larger geographic area. So what we're going to see is, while the overall nutrient load in the receiving waters does not increase per the model for the project, we're going to see these sensitive waters downstream of BRs 36 and 37 negatively impacted. And that, to me, is the sense of urgency here. And what we found in the course of the study is, because BR 36 has got what appears to be that right combination of very high nutrient load but not super high flows, it is a perfect candidate to capture and treat more effectively. But the answer is, we're going to see nutrient impacts in the OFWs downstream after the PSRP comes fully online that we've not seen in years past.
Thank you.
And that's an excellent point, Andy, that you brought up about the fishing, because that's what those bays and the research shows over many, many, many years that Rookery Bay has been conducting the research, that those bays are extremely fertile and so key to young fish and raising them, which feeds that 10,000 island fishery industry. And I think that's really a key point that you brought up. I really do. That's excellent.
If I may add to that, my stepson is a fishing guide in the 10,000 islands. And I love him, but I don't want him moving back home. So if we can keep those waters clean, we have a better chance of keeping him employed. So, I appreciate any effort in that regard.
Thank you very much. Any other board comments? Vice Chair Waters?
Just a couple comments and then a question at the end. One, just want to thank the Stantec team both for the real systemic way this was approached and the way you presented it made it very easy to understand and how you got to your rankings. So thank you for that. Secondly, a couple thoughts that I think tie right into what Tim talked about towards the end. I think the more water quality data we can get now will much better inform the decisions when this comes to design. So I would be completely supportive of that. And then likewise, my instinct would be that if we did what you suggested on parcel 13, that will greatly help our ability to operate this in the future and control how we operate it, that kind of thing. So I would be very supportive of that. The question I have is basically, where does this go from here? How do we, so we've got, a ranking system, some preferences. How do we decide how this moves forward or where it goes?
I think Lisa Keeler's in the position to answer that.
I am. Thank you. So a lot of the recommendations that were covered by Tim and Amanda and Kyle are the same things that the district is looking at. Continue the water quality monitoring. Additional water quality monitoring is going to be done by the Corps. We want to get some flow data out there, and that's something that we are working with Picune on. In fact, we were going to meet with him this morning before today's meeting. So things are starting to move already in the background. Tim had already alluded to the fact that we've had some meetings with DOT about the sediment removal in the US 41 ditch. So things are already starting to move. Again, coordination with the park, with state parks. Can there be a partnership? Can we work together and get some funding between the district and state parks to help them with a project there on that bicycle seat? Can we work with FDACs to get some funding for source control upstream? So all of those things are going to be happening over the next year between the district staff and Basin.
We're kind of in a sort of figure out what funding we'll have, when we'll have it, and then we would start to say, all right, let's figure out where and what we want to do.
Absolutely. And again, also referenced was the conversations going on with the Fiddler's Creek parcel. We might have some opportunities to partner with them. So a lot of great options moving forward, and we're taking hold of every single one of them. You're welcome.
It's one thing to identify the parcel, and it's another thing to have that parcel with a willing seller or somebody ready to go into a partnership. So I think that's probably where we're in that transition, and everything's on the table. I would say that every great idea is on the table, and that's due to our stakeholders and our working group and everybody else who's participated. And I can't thank them enough to get us to this point so quickly. Any other, yes, Ms. Rivera.
Yes. You mentioned that on Parcel on the 1207, the Collier Seminole Park has some investment being put into it coming up. Is that synergistic at all with this program, or can it become synergistic if we try to match up the timelines
I think
better?
the opportunity to work together is there. However, my understanding is that piece it's an old rural piece. And I think there was something in the unit management plan that talked about pushing down the edges of it to help restore flow over the area. And I think they have some money in their upcoming budget. And really for the first time since 2004, there's money in the budget to do something in that space. The timing is a little, a little off for me because, we're looking at it thinking of actually doing the opposite, which is to build it up to create an opportunity for water quality treatment there. So those are at opposition to each other to some degree. But I think, there's always opportunity for teamwork and working together and win-win situations. And one of the things we talked about was the system doesn't have to be 35 acres. It can be 15 or 20. And can you then pair with that some other options and ideas that help you get there and help the park achieve some of its greater objectives? So I think we don't need to talk in absolutes. We need to round the edges, work with everyone who's willing to sit at a table with us and see what we can come up with.
That's great.
Okay, great. Let's hear from the public. Troy, do we have anybody signed up?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 3 registered speakers here in the room. Your first speaker is Brad Cornell, and he'll be followed by Ernie Cox.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Brad Cornell. I'm here on behalf of Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida. And first, let me say thank you very much to Madam Chair, who has participated in almost all of these meetings yourself. Thank you for that. And to your staff, who have been very, very helpful to all of us on the technical working group. Thank you for that assistance. And to the consultants, you've been very receptive and providing information and data. This is important for the public and for us as stakeholders to participate in this really important process. So a couple of things to just add some comments to this discussion. One is that as Tim Hancock noted, this is the second of 2 studies. The first was a March 2021 feasibility study that was finalized and reported to the legislature on Picayune Strand water quality technology. What can we do to address the coming problem as restoration waters begin to flow? And so that was an important question. And in that report is a very clear recommendation for pursuing source control. In other words, we know where the pollution is coming from. We need to be not only looking at options to clean it up once it's downstream or before it goes further into the outstanding Florida waters, but let's also work together in a collaborative partnership amongst stakeholders and the farmers and the agencies to address pollution before it enters into that stream and has to be cleaned up. Better to prevent than a much more expensive cleanup afterwards. So that recommendation was pretty clear in that March 2021 study. I will just note that Audubon's disappointed that we haven't moved very far on that process for source control. It's a very, it's not just here, it's statewide. This is a challenge statewide. And I would just encourage you all to keep staff and stakeholders and participants in this discussion completely engaged in this source control question. It's really important for everybody to solve and will be a benefit to everyone. I want to note two more things. One is that the Area 13 parcels, that group has a lot of potential, especially if we can expand more into the private lands, not to the SERP lands, but more into the private lands. If we can get more acreage on that Area 13, that has a lot of benefit because that's as close to the source as we can get. And finally, I'll just note that Audubon objects to using any of Collier Seminole State Park lands, the bicycle seat in particular, which has monies set aside for restoration of that bicycle seat, as Tim Hancock had noted. It doesn't make sense to us to use land that was bought for conservation purposes and habitat preservation and restoration to clean up water on there are other alternatives, and indeed the study points to these other alternatives. So thank you very much for your considering our comments.
Thank you.
Your next speaker is Ernie Cox, and he will be followed by Meredith Budd.
Well, good afternoon, Ernie Cox. It's good to see everybody. It's also good to be back in this building. Many years ago, spent a lot of time here, but I'm here on behalf of my own company, Family Lands Remembered. We're a small consulting company, and we work on creative conservation projects and innovative water resources, public-private partnerships. And first of all, kudos to your board, to the South Florida board, and the Stantec team. Both documents very thorough, very detailed. A few suggestions. I provided some comments earlier. Is that my strong belief on projects like this is that urgency is the key. A perfect project 15 years from now is not worth a good project 3 years from now. And I've been involved in a lot of these for a long time. And I've worked with Brad for many years. In some of our greatest conservation objectives in the state of Florida have happened in a very short period of time. I had the pleasure of being involved with Sid Kitson's team on Babcock Ranch. That whole deal was put together in less than 10 months from start to finish. It means a whole lot of time together. It means meeting, it means detailed. But if more water is going to be coming out across 41 in 2.5 years, everything that can be done to try to have a project ready to accept that water and clean it in 2.5 years needs to be done. And there was a great explanation in the feasibility study of looking at partnerships. And so I'll just make a high level suggestion and then tell you why I care is do it all concurrently. The siting analysis, the finding the funding, the analysis, the water quality, the partnerships, the public outreach. Get the people in the room that need to do it, and you know what, just get it done. Doesn't have to be a formal process. Have a meeting. If somebody wants to work on it, they're invited. Sit down, work through, hash it out, get it done. And then my interest is, I mean, as this evolves, this is kind of what I do. So the ability to maybe put together a group, and I've talked to some people that are interested, maybe put together a group and say, you know what, here's the plan. And not only here's the plan, rather than waiting for the government to come up with the plan and implement the plan, maybe there's a way to put together a partnership and just do it together. So thank you very much. Really excited.
Thank you, Ernie, and thanks for traveling and being here with us today. Appreciate it.
Your next speaker is Meredith Budd, and then we have one speaker on Zoom with their hand raised.
Good afternoon. Meredith Budd on behalf of the Florida Wildlife Federation. So I just want to first thank the Stantec team and the district for this really collaborative effort over the last years. And the Federation is really pleased to be a part of it and part of the working group on this siting analysis. FWF agrees with Audubon in terms of the pollution source. I don't want to belabor this issue, but controlling the pollution source will really only help enhance the water quality projects at the end of the day that are going to be carried out on this site that we're choosing through this analysis. Also in agreement with Audubon, as Brad mentioned, FWF does not support the use of federal, state, or local conservation lands for an engineered water quality project. And they should have been excluded from the evaluation process. And so with that in mind, we do not support the use of the bicycle seat. You all know that Collier Seminole State Park is an outstanding Florida water. DEP noted throughout the process that use of that land would be inconsistent with the management plan for the state park. And Tim mentioned DEP has secured funding to restore that portion of the parcel 1207. So a water quality project just is not compatible. Tim also noted that the owner for parcel 1920 is open to conversations, and FWF believes this parcel should have received a higher ranking in general. He mentioned that there were notions of the benefit of this parcel during the water quality analysis that had taken place last year. So it's extremely curious, I will say, now that there is potential interest in purchasing the property from the district for such a project, that the landowner has submitted an upzoning application to the county that's currently in review. The property was designated to be a conservation easement by the Army Corps of Engineers permit that was issued in the development of Fiddler's Creek, believed for estancia and Oyster Harbor. And that piece of land should have been placed in a conservation easement within or before 90 days prior to construction of those developments. Well, those developments are very much well underway, and there is no easement in place on that property. So to that end, a water quality project can certainly be compatible with a conservation easement. Development on that parcel, however, is not. And a development would not be possible had that conservation easement been filed and they were in compliance with their permit to begin with. So now there seems to be a little bit of a conflict with the parcel that really should have been the highest, FWF believes the highest ranking parcel in this study, and the fact that it's now in limbo in terms of what that use will look like in the future with its proximity to Collier Seminole, really problematic for development, definitely compatible with the water quality project though. I also just want to quickly mention parcel 803. I know they said they're not a willing seller, but given the site is primarily a fallow farm field and any future potential interest in developing that property will require stormwater needs. So I really, really want to encourage the district, other NGOs, stakeholders, come together, figure out something creative. Can we do something that would benefit our water quality issues while also benefiting the future interests of the landowner, knowing that any future development would require such stormwater maintenance. Appreciate the time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, we have one attendee with their hand raised. They did not register a name. Zoom user, we're prompting you to unmute if you will do so. And you are unmuted. You have 3 minutes, please. Please start with your name.
Yes, this is Kathy Rowley, Director of Science, Conservancy of Southwest Florida. I apologize. I couldn't get the chat to work to enter my name. Anyway, on behalf of the Conservancy and its members, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I really appreciate it. I wish I could be there in person, but 2 of my staff members have COVID, and I just didn't want to take the chance of exposing anyone if I do, which I hope I don't. Anyway, first, I appreciate the effort that went into the water quality modeling section and concur with the recommendation to perform additional water quality monitoring. The question of whether a site has the capacity to handle the treatment systems necessary to reduce the pollutant load to levels appropriate for an OFW is critical to the site selection process. This report bases its modeling on influent and effluent rates on the 2004 to 2013 monthly water quality projections for nitrogen and phosphorus. And they've been acknowledged to be insufficient for design level analysis. So relying strictly on this modeling moving forward could lead to erroneous conclusions and possibly leading to treatment design that is not sufficient. Second, we think it's a mistake not to include the 2022 data at the TAMTOM or BR36 sampling site. While normally you would not use a half year in discerning trends, there's no getting around the fact that the discovery of phosphorus levels greater than 1 milligram per liter flowing into an outstanding Florida waters is alarming. Statistically speaking, there's no significant trend in the data at TAMTOM, since over time the nutrient levels are consistently high. Therefore, detection this year of basically wastewater concentrations of phosphorus, even during peak year sampling, it's like a canary in a coal mine. It's an indication there's something really wrong here that needs fixing. So it's critical to use real-time current level of phosphorus and nitrogen. Otherwise, the treatment design and size could be insufficient and likely would require costly retrofits. Source control was mentioned. I agree with Brad that it needs more emphasis to be placed on this option, since it would be the most effective way to prevent downstream impacts. Third, prior to purchasing a site, the ecological ramifications of using that site and subsequent impacts to the adjacent lands requires a more in-depth investigation. For example, understanding the potential impacts to listed and species of special concern is necessary. This information was not included in the scope of the report, but it's crucial to developing accurate ecological ranking. And it needs to be analyzed before any final sites are selected, since many of these species reside in the sites under consideration. You don't want to find out after purchase that you bought a pig in a poke. The Conservancy also, like other of the nonprofit environmental organizations, don't, or at least most of them anyway, don't support using Collier Seminole State Park and OFW as a treatment site. I mean, currently the bicycle seat, that site 207, it is disturbed, but it's surrounded by rare and historic ecosystems that could either be directly or indirectly impacted from treatment area discharge. And restoring ecological function, it's a critical component of the end game. Destroying other ecological resources should never be, or important ones, should never be considered as part of a solution. The park is in the process of trying to restore the area. And these are just a few of the myriad of reasons why Collier Seminole State Park should not be considered for use as a stormwater treatment site. And lastly, combining parcels is likely the best treatment option. Of the sites under consideration, an out-of-the-box scenario would be to create a flowway across just the southern part of parcel 803 and using the existing canal that is there to connect flow to the eastern portion of parcel 1920, where a larger stormwater treatment management system could be installed in the areas not considered usable by the owner. Acquire only the footprint along the southern border of parcel 803. This avoids acquiring property that fronts 41, which is lucrative to that owner. So I think there are some different scenarios that could be worked out and different treatment train types options with different sites. If you just think a little bit out of the box, it might not be one whole site, but several partial sites. And thank you for the opportunity to comment here today. I appreciate the amount of work that Stantec and the district did to compile this report. And I'm very grateful for the chance to be included in all the technical meetings and give comments. So thank you again.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for your consideration for our health today. I really appreciate that. Is there any other public comment?
No, Madam Chair, that is all your public comment on this item.
Any other board comment on this? I think that what I heard, which is very encouraging, is everybody has identified some way to move this forward. Now, it wasn't the same way, but they were still on board moving this train forward. So I'm very encouraged by that. And Ernie, there's a lot of truth to what you have to say about getting people around a table and seeing how we can address these issues and move this forward. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate everybody's input. And thank you again, Stantec, for being our lead consultants on this and pulling all these pieces together. Thank you very much. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next topic, which is an update on the Logan Boulevard emergency pump operations, the operational plan. And we have Akina Washana.
I see a screenshot that isn't me, but that's okay. I wouldn't be using any slide decks for today's conversation.
Let's get that right and make sure. Okay, thank you.
So good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Thank you for having me back today. My name is Aki Owoshino, and I'm the Chief of Hydrology and Hydraulics at the South Florida Water Management District. I'm here today to fulfill a commitment I made when last I was here to talk to you in April at your April business meeting. As you may recall, at that meeting, I came to share an update with you on ongoing work that the district was doing to develop an operational guideline for the emergency pumps being considered in Bonita Springs. As I informed you at the time, the city and the Water Management District had just entered into a cooperative agreement. It was inked, I think, February 4th. It was for 10 years. And as part of that agreement, we both agreed to work together to look for solutions to mitigate flooding in South Lee County. One of the terms of the agreement was the development of an operational guideline for emergency pumps to be deployed by the city of Bonita Springs in the event of a declared emergency. In the presentation I gave at the time, I provided a little bit of history of flooding within the region, starting with flooding in 1995 that resulted in a South Lee County watershed study that was published in about 1999. That study, which was one of the first to recommend reconnecting part of the headwaters of the Cocohatchee that flowed towards the Imperial River towards the Cocohatchee, included language that, and I'm going to quote, says, sending the flows when Cocohatchee Canal system, and that's the part of the quote, can safely receive the flows. What has happened or what has not been addressed in the 2 decades since that report was written was the question of when can the regional system safely take the flows. The city of Bonita Springs, as part of our agreement, took the opportunity to ask the district, as the operators of the regional system, that question. And one of the requirements of the agreement was to provide within 90 days of executing the agreement, essentially the answers to that particular question. And that was the task that we took on. We put together to do this work a multidisciplinary team. I described some of it, the team members to you at that presentation. I mentioned that we had representatives from your staff, Lisa, Brad, and Ken Feng were on the team, your modeler. We also had folks from our Fort Myers office, included folks in regulatory, flood, and a number of people from my team and others within the district that had the requisite and relevant skills to be able to develop the kind of guidelines that we felt we needed to put together. We engaged with the county staff early and talked to staff and their engineers, and we got some early indications of some of their key concerns. The team, taking that input and their background and skills at water management, came together with a set of guidelines that we ultimately delivered to the city of Bonita Springs in May. That was shortly after my presentation to you all. A couple of reminders before I continue. I think I told you at the time that the guideline that we're putting together was focused on the receiving system. Our goal was to make sure that actions in Logan Boulevard, pumping from that location, did not result in flooding or an adverse condition in Collier County as part of the regional system. We also wanted to make sure that it was not just time-based. It wasn't some days after an event you could do something. It was conditions-based. And it actually looked at the receiving system and made a determination based on the state of the system. And to that end, we looked at water levels in the Marsh area just south of Logan Boulevard. We looked at water levels in the canal systems, including Cocoa Canal, upstream of Cocoa 3, between Cocoa 2 and Cocoa 3, and downstream of Cocoa 1. And in looking at all of those areas, we came up with criteria that would have to be met before all of them would have to be met before the district would authorize the city of Bonito Springs to turn on their pumps. We felt that by using this approach, we would come up with something that would really make sure that we didn't introduce flooding in Collier County, trying to fix flooding in Bonito Springs. Now, since that last meeting, a number of things has happened. Shortly after the meeting with you, I was actually back in this room to talk to the Collier County Commission and give a presentation on the topic. We also had an opportunity to participate with Lee County, Collier County, and others as part of regional coordination that's ongoing. I have talked to many, many people, stakeholders and folks who are interested in this subject and some of their representatives. And we've received several comments from many people. I can't name them all, but we certainly appreciate all of their comments and input. And I'd like to acknowledge, I think we got written comment from the Esplanade Golf and Country Club of Naples, the Flowway CDD, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, Audubon Society, Florida Wildlife Federation, and certainly Collier County. Collier County has really engaged us closely on this. If you permit me, I'll take a little digression and kind of pump the team. I think we're successful in our initial goal of trying to come up with a set of criteria that would make sure that we don't introduce flooding in Collier County. And the reason I think that is of all the comments we got, and we got many of them, I don't think there was one, maybe there might be one in the back of the document somewhere, that suggested we use more stringent criteria to protect the system in Collier County. Not a comment about that. There were several comments, but none really that addressed that. And those were the key elements in our guideline document. I want to credit that outcome to the quality of the team we put together, and very importantly, to the quality of the engagement we got, as I mentioned, with the county, but also with a number of the people I named earlier who engaged us early on this project. So what did those comments indicate? I mentioned we got many comments. We kind of group these into, I can group them into 5 broad categories. There were some comments that had to do with an increased comfort level in the impact downstream of Cocoa 1. We had used criteria that was selected based on historic data with no modeling at the time. And a few people were curious to know what would the modeling indicate. We had some comments that had to do with a request to be informed when we authorized the city of Bonito Springs to use the pumps. There were a number of comments that looked at water quality, more that looked at the fact that you'll be putting water into privately held conservation lands, and some that focused on the remediation of any potential impact of that pumping in those conservation lands. There were some other comments that were not easy to lump, and they were maybe targeted more to the larger context of water management in the region. And so I'm not focusing on those today. There are things that will come up in front of you that I'm sure we'll be addressing over the next coming couple of years. So as I noted earlier, very few, if any of the comments we got affected the content of the document we put together. So that draft document we delivered to the city in May is essentially unchanged. I think that 1 or 2 minor edits were made. And so the goal that I have following today's presentation will be to remove draft from that document and turn that back to the city of Bonito Springs. Now, most of the comments are important and are extremely relevant when it comes to a time when we have to actually make an operation or authorize an operation or issue a permit for the city to pump. They have to be evaluated or considered relative to the emergency event that we're going through. And I'll get to talk to them in a minute. I'm going to try to go through the key 5 groupings. Regarding the downstream condition, that was an easy one to fix. Asking a modeler to do a new model was easy to do. And we had the opportunity of some work that you had all funded to build a better model following the level of service work in the tidal portion of Collier County. We had worked with a firm to come up with models that covered all of urban coastal Collier and has a very high level, robust stormwater model tool that had been developed. We took the one model that covered the Cocoache area and we secured that company's services to run a couple of scenarios for us. The key outcome of that modeling essentially was that we were right, our criteria were conservative. Even when we used earlier releases of water into the system, the effects were limited to flows within the canal system, stayed within banks, and areas directly connected in the wetlands or ponds that were directly connected to the canal. Essentially, we could confirm that the criteria we picked were good. Quick aside, if anybody's interested in that tool, the Flow 2D tool, we've offered it to local government in the area, including some training opportunity, and we're going to have one more this next year. Moving on to the notification request. The notification doesn't belong in a guideline document for Bonita Springs. It does belong in our standard operational protocol, SOP, for EOC engagement. So we will add language there that when we notify Collier County, who we intend to notify, when we give the go-ahead, we will add to that notification the appropriate additional names, organizations, or agencies that need to be notified. So that's something I can commit to do at a later time. As I mentioned, a lot of the comments we had were event specific. And so when I look at the comments related to water quality and private property, and I really don't have specific information to provide to you at this time, other than to say that I believe that there would be considerations at the time of actually authorizing an operation, and they would be considered along with the characteristics of the event we're looking at. Now, I think it's important that I should stress that we're talking about during emergencies. And during emergencies, declared emergencies, a lot of priority is given to issues that have life and safety potential outcomes. If you have flooding in an area, the Bonita Springs, that's continued for 2-3 weeks with the roads all blocked, unable to pass, people requiring prescriptions that can't, life-saving prescriptions that can be delivered, or emergency vehicles not being able to get to somebody. Those are the kind of things that will be considered at that time, along with these other issues that are raised in making a decision. It's important to kind of make that note in the context of ultimately how this decision will be made, and for folks to be aware of what will be considered at that time. On the one last item regarding who does remediation, the request kind of seemed reasonable to us, and we took this up with the members of the team who are part of our regulatory shop at the district. They coordinated within regulation, and the possibility or the potential of adding a language to our standard permits for emergency pumps that address who was responsible if your pumping created erosion, scarring, maybe loss of vegetation or some sedimentation, what kind of remediation and who had to take care of that. The possibility of adding language like that to our standard permit has been considered, and I think that might be a good outcome of this engagement we've had. I've kind of highlighted most of the comments we got, and I'd like to spend a minute or two to tie a few things together before I kind of wrap up and take questions. We've gone through this exercise and we've met the obligation we had to write something for Bonita Springs. I think it's a great document. I think it makes sure that we've identified criteria when Bonita Springs could pump, and their pumping to help with their flooding would not create flooding in Collier County. One thing I want to note, though, is that the fact that we've written this document itself doesn't authorize anything. they still have to go through all the appropriate steps that they would have had to go to a year or 2 years or 3 years ago to be able to get that authorization to pump. They'll still have to ask for an emergency permit with or without this document. When they ask for the emergency permit, the district will make the appropriate decision and either issue that permit or not. If we issue the permit, the one thing we have added by virtue of this action is some additional guidelines or guidance to the city that tells them this is when it is okay to pump towards Bonita Springs, to pump from Bonita Springs towards Collier County, to not create flooding in Collier County by your attempt to mitigate flooding. I think that additional piece of guidance, I think is an important piece of information for them to have. And so I kind of hope that that's a helpful thing to have around. With that said, I really appreciate the engagement we got for folks on this. The product we put together, which I'm proud of, my team did an excellent job, but a lot of it was because we got real good engagement from stakeholders in this area and helped improve the eventual product. I hope that as we finalize these guidelines, that we actually never get to test them, or at least that we don't get to test them before some other actions that have been taken by Bonita and others, Lee County, to address flooding in that area are a little bit more mature. But in the event that we do get to test these guidelines, I feel very confident that the guidelines we've put in place and the criteria that we have set up would really help make sure that those operations in Bonita Springs do not result in an intentional adverse effect for the folks in Collier County. I'll be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Akeem. I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and start with public comment. Troy, do we have anyone signed up to speak on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have 7 registered speakers here in the room. Your first speaker is Zach Stamp, and he'll be followed by Brad Cornell.
Thank you. Sorry, I sat in the back. I figured I wouldn't be first. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Zach Stamp, Chairman of the Flowway CDD Board. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again on this topic of great concern to the residents of Esplanade Golf and Country Club. I think some of you have started receiving emails indicating the concerns that they have, and I assume other residents in the downstream area will begin to respond to you as well. When I spoke to you in July, I indicated we had many questions about the emergency permit. These questions all remain unanswered, although Akeem, I think, has gone a long way towards starting to address those. In the pre-meeting we had, if you want to call it that, he at least acknowledged that they're on his radar. And so maybe that is going to change. The concern thus far seems to be more with water quantity than quality. We're concerned about some of the quality of the water that's going to come down. And we are also, as he indicated, concerned about the remediation of what that does to our success criteria, to our wildlife, to the environment in our preserves. I think it must be acknowledged that Bonita Springs has a problem. That cannot be denied. But this situation reminds me of the story of the boy who murdered his parents. And after he was convicted, he begged the court for mercy because, after all, he was an orphan. I mean, they created this situation. And they are now looking to say, well, it's our problem. We didn't do the right zoning, we didn't do the right planning, but we'll just pump it all down the river or down the slough, down the preserves. We don't find that to be an adequate solution. My request today, and I've got my lawyer and engineers here who will be more specific, but my request today is that we at least all try to work together to solve Bonita's problem, which is very real, without creating problems for all of the rest of us downstream, our environment and our communities. Our lawyers and our engineers would welcome the opportunity to meet with Akeem and his staff to flesh out some of these issues, particularly the remediation and the quality issues. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And you will be hearing from some other folks. Thanks.
Thank you.
Your next speaker is Brad Cornell. He'll be followed by James Messick.
Good afternoon. Again, Brad Cornell on behalf of Audubon, Florida and Audubon Western Everglades. Thanks for the chance to address this. And thank you, Akeem, for the update and the pre-meeting discussion, which was helpful to me. I guess the bottom line from Audubon's perspective is that the emergency pumps, which are a total of 65 CFS capacity, don't really solve any problems. They seem to us to be unnecessary. So if they're unnecessary and not providing a positive contribution to a flooding problem that clearly Bonita Springs has, I don't understand why this is even going forward. The small area that would be addressed by turning on these pumps doesn't need it, and the areas that do need it, these aren't going to address. And so I guess this gets us all to a question of what do we need to be looking at? And so to that end, I would encourage the Basin and the district to convene stakeholders like Audubon, Florida Wildlife Federation, Bonita Springs Conservancy, the CDD, all these folks, and you all need to sit around a table and talk about some wider concepts of solving a flooding problem in Bonita Springs. And let me lay out just one scenario. You all have actually accomplished, I'll say the district has accomplished, restoring the critical Southern Crew project down in the Canal, the Imperial, with the same watershed. And that was a tremendous accomplishment. And I will hold that out as an example of a portion of the kinds of watershed scale solutions that are necessary for addressing the kinds of flooding problems that Bonita Springs experiences regularly and has for many years. And so I posed this question to Keen, and I'll ask you all too. I would encourage the staff for the Basin and the district to do a modeling exercise of with and without that critical Southern Crew restoration. What effect did that have? What did we gain through that 4,000 some acres of restoration in terms of water storage, attenuation, flood protection benefits? So that's one question. And of course, part of that question is also to ask, how many more acres of restoration of, say, Flint Penn Strand do we need to accomplish to increase that benefit for downstream Bonita Springs? Do you see where I'm going with that? There is also a flood plan that Lee County is pursuing that
Wrap it up. Go ahead.
that you all need to take a look at. I say these 65 CFS worth of emergency pumps are unnecessary and a waste of time and money and a possible threat. And there are many more ideas that a stakeholder group that you all could convene could come up with. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Your next speaker is James Messick. He'll be followed by Greg Woods.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Thank you very much. My name is James Messick. I'm a professional engineer in the state of Florida and district engineer for Flowway CDD. Flowway oversees the stormwater management system and external preserves, amongst other assets for Esplanade Golf and Country Club. I did want to speak on a couple things after reading through Mr. Keen's report. I think he did a very good job identifying, those conditions based for no water quantity concerns downstream, but as Zach had mentioned, we still have concerns with the water quality of the pumped water into our preserves. There were no environmental studies done to anticipate what kind of water we would see coming into our property. It is a private property that the district owns and that we're in charge of. The lack of water quality, does that, is there any NPDES requirements that we're breaching just because it's emergency conditions? Do we not need to follow those other types of permits? And as Akeem had mentioned, he's going to look at, and I appreciate the erosion and channeling that may happen after pumping events into the preserves. We can certainly make sure it's a collaborative effort and make sure that those are addressed and fixed and remediated after any events. And hopefully those events are as rare as they've been in the past, but we really don't know in the future how often the governor is going to declare a state of emergency for Lee County and these pumps may be turned on. And lastly, more of a recommendation, as anything, and that's whether or not a pre versus post environmental study could be done to help confirm that no adverse impacts are seen on our preserves. That's really all that I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Your next speaker is Greg Woods. He'll be followed by Jessica Wilson.
Good afternoon. I'm counsel for the Flowway CDD. Obviously, we are a primary stakeholder because the pumping is going to go directly onto the preserves, which are property that we own and control, that we have the financial obligation to maintain. Those preserves are also subject to a South Florida Water Management District permit, wherein we have to meet certain criteria and certain success criteria relative to those preserves. That is also a significant financial obligation. There's been no discussion about if that water is pumped in there. There's no analysis of what will happen to the preserves. There is no analysis of what that will do to our ability to meet success criteria, expenses, and all the other things that we're going to have to undertake relative to those preserves. Obviously, the water coming down from Bonita, it will be contaminated, we'll have sewage. And so these are significant financial issues for the CDD that have not been addressed. We're talking about a plan. Plans are supposed to address potential things that can happen. This plan, and Keen's an expert on water quantity, not going to dispute it. Apparently we can handle the water quantity, but this plan doesn't address water quality. It doesn't address cleanup, which may be significant costs. It doesn't address how we handle those things. And that's what a plan should do. A plan should address all those aspects, not just quantity, quality, what's going to happen, where's this, what happens as a result of this transfer of water. Absolutely critically important. The plan talks about, it has a communication protocol in the plan. The communication protocol is between the city of Bonita Springs and the district. The communication protocol doesn't give information to Collier County, doesn't give information to the first affected property owner, the CDD, or the Esplanade community. The preserves are basically a part of the Esplanade community, which is some 1,000 homes. And so that the Esplanade HOA is also clearly an affected party, and the communication protocol doesn't address this. Akeen says that we raise concerns that should be addressed when the emergency permit occurs. Well, that's not going to happen. That emergency permit is going to come up and there's going to be flooding and somebody's going to make an instant decision, and none of these items will have been addressed per a plan. And all we're asking for is that there be a plan now ahead of time before the hurricane that comes through 10 days from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Your next speaker is Jessica Wilson. She'll be followed by Trinity Scott.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jessica Wilson with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Thank you, Akeen, for your presentation today. And I also want to thank the board for continuing to include this issue on the agenda. We're concerned to learn today that the district intends to move forward with the operational plan without addressing water quality and ecological impacts to the receiving system. As we've expressed in previous comments in a letter to the district, the plan narrowly focuses on volumetric capacity and directly benefits select developments along Bonita Beach Road. This should not be standard operating procedure during times of significant flooding, and it really doesn't address the larger flooding issues that the city is facing. As conservation easement holders, we, along with other private property owners directly impacted by this plan and related decisions, should be involved in all conversations. And to my knowledge, beyond these updates at the Basin board meetings, there's not been a public meeting or joint conversations that have included all of the stakeholders. So we're asking the district and Bonita Springs to hold a dedicated public meeting to provide much needed additional information address the many unanswered questions that stakeholders do have, and also hear stakeholder concerns before moving forward. The public meeting should also include an update on what the city and individual developments are doing to proactively address and minimize flooding on-site and throughout the city. It's imperative that the district analyze the direct and secondary impacts to the slough, the preserves, and the Cocohatchee system, which includes outstanding Florida waters. We need a better understanding of the current water quality conditions, water levels, and overall environmental conditions in the slough to fully understand what would happen if and when untreated floodwater is pumped into this area at rates of 65 to even potentially 90 CFS. So we continue to ask the district for a full environmental review and analysis before moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your next speaker is Trinity Scott. She will be followed by Meredith Budd.
Good afternoon, Trinity Scott, Collier County Transportation Management Services Department Head. Thank you for allowing me to speak today on this agenda item. As I've discussed with you previously, Collier County Board of County Commissioners passed Resolution 2018-132, which opposed the functional diversion of stormwater from Bonita Springs until certain items were addressed. And some of those items included water quality, review of alternatives to the diversion, the impacts on the primary, secondary, tertiary, and estuary systems and surrounding neighborhoods and private properties. And finally, it must include full public outreach. We appreciate that the district has developed specific emergency pumping protocols that deal directly with the Cocohatchee system and its ability to potentially receive additional waters. But as we say, the devil's in the details. We feel that the following concerns and questions need to be addressed. Who will operate the pumps? We believe if the pumps are to be operated, they should be operated by an independent third party. And we understand that the city of Bonita Springs has requested the district to operate the pumps. We concur that the notification protocols as identified by Mr. Woods on behalf of the Flowway CDD should include those underlying property owners that will be directly receiving these waters before it finds its way to the Cocohatchee, as well as Collier County. And that there should be some sort of an agreement, perhaps an interlocal agreement, memorandum of understanding between the impacted parties that identifies the rules of engagement, such as a commitment by the city that should remediation be necessary or additional improvements needed to accommodate the pumping, that they're responsible for the costs associated. And if no such agreement exists, the district should commit to specific permit conditions to address these responsibilities. We are not opposed to pumping in general. We understand the life safety priorities, and Collier County has to do it from time to time as well in our own system. But the fundamental difference is we are pumping from our system to our system. So if I use a non-technical term, we mess it up, we got to fix it. There's more to consider than just the carrying capacity of the Cocohatchee Canal. What are the effects to the downstream secondary and tertiary systems in the neighborhoods? And you hear those almost at every meeting under public comment about folks not being able to get their water off their site into the Cocohatchee. We're also concerned about potential changes necessary to the county's floodplain management plan. Without answers to these and other fundamental questions, the same questions continue to be asked over and over with no identified solution. There must be definitive solutions to the areas identified by Akeen, and they must be vetted with public information meetings and engagement of impacted property owners, stakeholders, and other interested parties. Collier County has and continues to be willing to work cooperatively with all stakeholders to determine options that are in the best interest of the residents, businesses, and visitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Trinity.
Your next registered speaker is Meredith Budd. I would like to remind those on Zoom, if you wish to speak on this item, please raise your hand.
Good afternoon again, Meredith Budd on behalf of the Florida Wildlife Federation. As you know, the Florida Wildlife Federation, along with my colleagues with Audubon and the Conservancy, are easement holders for the Western Preserve that borders the Esplanade. And we also have outstanding concerns with the operational plan for emergency pumping, primarily because the ecological impacts of the pumping hasn't really been fully addressed. We believe, just as the Conservancy mentioned in their comments, that an environmental analysis of the impact of pushing untreated floodwater into the Cocohatchee system and through that preserve area needs to be evaluated, and all of the hydrological impacts as well. One thing that I think Brad with Audubon had mentioned that I think is really, I want to emphasize that it doesn't really, even the emergency pumping doesn't really fix the problem, especially if the operational plan is followed. So if the conditions set forth in the plan are adhered to, and the pumping does not begin until the Cocohatchee system can hold it during a storm event or during an quote emergency, Bonita won't be able to pump this water to alleviate their flooding. They're going to sit with flooded water just like they did previously if they're following the operational plan. So if the operational plan is really going to be in place and make them stick to the conditions, it really doesn't do anything because they're going to be flooded anyway until the levels or the system in the Cocohatchee reaches a point at which it can receive more water. And it's going to be several days. So I don't know the solution, but an emergency pumping situation where a plan doesn't alleviate the flooding issue doesn't seem to be that solution. So I agree. I think Brad had mentioned talking about those greater projects that we can do that really can address the problem. Bonita is really something we do need to look at collectively as a region. Also, I don't believe we have baseline water quality monitoring done in the preserve area. So I think that needs to be set up. And I don't know what entity would be best to do that. If it's something the district can coordinate with the county, or the county has maybe perhaps existing remote systems that they can set up, but we need a baseline monitoring. And I really think including something in the operational plan that talks about what happens to the system if it is negatively impacted and what that reclamation would look like. The way that Trinity had worded it, I think is even better, setting up some sort of MOU or some sort of an agreement with the city to ensure that now that we would have baseline monitoring, if there's an impact to that system, what that impact looks like, how you make it right, how you do the reclamation, that should be done in some sort of MOU. And it certainly should be mentioned in the operational plan, at least to indicate that we know there's going to be impacted floodwater moving into the system. And if it is a negative impact, which we'll find out from the baseline monitoring, there's going to be a way to make those reclamation for it. So appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have one hand raised on Zoom. David Boguslawski, you are being prompted to unmute at this time, sir, if you will do so. And I see you're unmuted. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Dave Boguslawski. I am the president of the Homeowners Association of Esplanade Golf and Country Club of Naples. We are a community of 1,184 homes, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the residents and the Homeowners Association about the emergency pumps. Basically, I'm not an expert in the studies you do, how you do your work. I do have a background in emergency planning. I worked for the largest electric utility in New England. I ran the operations areas. And a plan is not some simple studies. A plan is contingency planning, planning out a lot of scenarios, planning out the details, planning out the order in which you do things. Your communications plan goes in all sorts of directions. There's a lot. I could just keep going on and on and on. The idea that you do a plan now so we can build a plan later, I just don't get it. There are a lot of concerns by the residents. There's confusion about what's been done, what hasn't been done. I strongly encourage you to have a stakeholder process, whatever you can do to help us communicate with Bonita Springs and with stakeholders along the way. I had a very nice conversation with Lisa Keeler, who reached out to me the other day, and I really appreciated that conversation. You got a good one there in Lisa. So thank you for calling me. Again, I just respectfully ask that you help us ensure that we have a process, we have the studies to fully consider this matter before saying anything is done and ready to move to the next level. By talking, we will actually develop a real plan that is actionable, and we can address things like notifications, operating controls, monitoring, and appropriate remedies for the plan's downstream impacts. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to working with you and all involved as we move forward.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, that was your final speaker for this item.
Okay, thank you very much, Troy. Board comment or questions? Go ahead.
I have a comment. I usually have a solution to everything, even though I don't know what may not be correct. But in this one, I really don't have a solution to this problem, but I do have a comment that I think is noteworthy for the board. Is that I think this is, as was indicated by a number of the speakers, that this is really this problem is the lack of foresight and looking ahead, probably 25, 30 years ago. So people in the room today, we cannot held accountable, but I just think that we need to consider the ramifications, such as we did in the first presentation today, of what can go wrong. And now we're dealing with it, and we're trying to find out a solution, which unfortunately isn't going to make anybody happy. So I think the issue of looking ahead was lacking many years ago. And I find it also interesting, there's a number of homeowners groups that have commented on this issue. There's probably a lot that aren't, because they may even be part of the problem. I think it may be even worth a consideration, and Akeen, maybe you could help us out as to where the source of this problem is. What's the cause of this? If we were to look back 25, 30 years or whatever it may be, I'm just throwing out, if where was the lack of planning that could create this problem, which is now really doesn't have a great solution. So that's just my comment on the situation. It's how we can learn from this situation.
Akeen, did you want to?
Oh, I'll be happy to respond now, but if you want to, I can also wait and get.
Maybe Akeen, in the consideration of everybody, we can do that privately. And so I think my comment in general, I think the lack of planning is what I would hope would convey would be of value to the meeting today.
I can just add one thing. I think whatever the failings up till now, I think there's been a recognition and engagement, not only by City of Bonita Springs, but also by Lee County, that there's a need to address the flooding related issues in South Lee. Part of the idea of getting into a 10-year agreement with the city to help start looking at things like this is to have that long-term plan or vision. The one piece though, is that back in 1995, the example I usually give when a lot of this work started, there were several recommendations that came out of the study that was done then. This was one of them. It was one of towards the tail end of the recommendations, but there were others, some of which have been implemented and some of which have not in the 20-something years since. Somebody mentioned Lee County's study done by AIM. It recommends multiple potential courses of action that the county, I think, is pursuing. And I know that Bonita Springs, during the coordination meeting that we had with them, they described some of the actions that were taking, including buyouts, things that we're doing to address their flooding issue. Many people have mentioned that 65 CFS doesn't solve their flooding. They know that. I think they have other plans that they are working on. I think this just happens to be one potential that had been identified in previous studies that they want to keep, they wanted to explore, keep on the table. And they worded the question to us very carefully. It was, what would the regional system take? And I completely appreciate all the comments we're getting on water quality. Those are important considerations. But to solve the overall issue in South Lee County, I think there's going to be a need to do more comprehensive work. And I think the board you already primed us to know that you're likely going to ask us this question sometime in the next year or so. And we're working very frantically to get the tools ready to be able to answer that question. I've received comments today about flooding, but in the appropriate meetings, you'll hear the same thing about restoration and about potential water supply tied to this corkscrew area. So I assume that we're going to be eventually tasked with looking comprehensively at everything. But the action that we had to do was just to answer the question, what can the receiving system take? We haven't written a plan of action for implementing emergency pumps. And I think I get the concerns that have been raised, but the solution of this problem would involve clearly some more work that I know the Lee County has started and they intend to keep working on. Bonita Springs have started, and they intend to engage us on that as well. It will ultimately happen. But you're right, it's been many years since it was first identified, and we don't have all the fixes yet.
Thank you. I think it was probably now about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, that I've actually visited the Imperial River area where the most of the flooding occurred after Irma, and went into the South Crew area and even down Logan Boulevard and looked across the county border into this conservation area, because I was discussing post-Irma flooding issues and what could be resolved. So I've actually walked the ground in this case. And I would agree with Brad Cornell's comments that the regional solution and the use of South Crew is something that we need to take a look at for the future in terms of addressing some of the flooding that occurs in this area. And I think that we're doing it, Akeen. I think that it's something that we're taking a look at as the district, as the South Florida Water Management District, to see what solutions can be addressed with those crew lands. I think that's really important piece to keep in focus. I think also what I'm hearing today from the update, and again, this is just an update for the board and not a voting item or anything for us today. What I'm hearing is people want to be a part of some type of public process where everybody can get in the same room and have some type of input, if only to be heard, in order to just feel like they can ask you questions, or whoever the representative needs to be on this issue. And I'm not so sure that's not a bad idea. And I know this plan we've been working on it for a long time, but there's really no rush with it. And it might be beneficial. I just throw that out there for you to kind of think about, because that's what I'm hearing, rather than in a board setting when they're coming before us to speak their concerns, maybe some more, a better environment where they can have some give and take, some questions answered, things like that. And I just leave that out there in terms of for you to see if there is some type of process where they can be heard and see what that, because there's no rush at the present time.
I think that last statement there is no rush. The work we've done doesn't drive anything. It just answers the question and sets it to the side. So there is time to, if there's a desire to explore other things, there's time that between the county, Bonita Springs, the coordination that happens between the governments, we can be part of that conversation and look to what might be the course of action that they might actually want to take. I've heard a lot of people talk about, putting it into the natural areas. And I believe that in some of the early conversation, I think Trinity mentioned it when she got up to talk, the possibility of looking at alternate routes, that's not the route. It's something that's come up in discussion. It hasn't quite yielded a solid response. There are issues with maybe the need for improvements, actual infrastructure. And so, but these are the kind of discussions that I think over time would happen. And when I ended by saying, I hope these guidelines never get tested, it's not because I don't think they're good. I think they are great. I just think that it may not be necessary to test them if there are actions we can take, intervene in between now and when we get the next big event that might actually test them. That makes this a moot point. The thing is, we just don't know when that next event is. Maybe it's going to be 6 years from now. Maybe it's going to be 2 next year. We don't know. And so the intent to continue to talk about solving the flood control issues in South Lee and looking at the combined system between North Coley and South Lee, I think is one we expect we'll be participating in. It will not be specific to the emergency pump. It will be more likely to the larger question that I think, I can't remember which board meeting it was, but it was when I think Audubon came back with the modeling they'd done in Collier County. I listened very carefully to your comments, and we knew there was something coming. And so Kent's managing a project right now to get the tools ready. When that ask comes, I think it's going to be a concerted effort. It will look at everything. It will address the water supply components of it. It will address the flood control components of it, and it will look at the environmental pieces, the issue with water level falling in lettuce lakes that have been brought up by the Audubon group. There are enough things hanging out there that we need to get a good tool to handle in a comprehensive way. And I think we intend to stay engaged in that conversation. And over the last year and a half or so that we've been kind of talking with folks around here, between my staff and myself, we've established enough relationships that I think we'll be able to have the correct discussions to look for a lasting solution. But it's not going to be just this one action or this one option for the city of Bonita Springs. It will be a more comprehensive effort that would engage them, Collier County, maybe Lee County as well, to look at the entire corkscrew system, South Lee and North Collier.
Yeah, it's probably in there. I didn't want to put Trinity on the spot by, asking her those questions that you alluded to. And I know that the Collier County staff has been engaged, and they are looking for some alternate routing, as I understand. Trinity, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you'd like to come forward and kind of give the board an update and the public about some of those conversations, maybe.
Certainly. Once again, for the record, Trinity Scott, and most of you know me as the road person. So when I look at a water problem, I try to figure out how can I fix it by a road. So, and Akeen and I had a great opportunity to have a little bit of conversation about perhaps why some of these items won't work. But as I was sitting in Bonita Springs office, looking at a map and looking at Logan Boulevard, is there a way to perhaps divert some amount of water down Logan Boulevard, which will ultimately get to the Cocohatchee as well, because that's where we outfall, or perhaps even the interstate. I understand that there's a length, obviously, to get back to the interstate, but I was looking at trying to find alternatives to utilizing the private property, or to be able to minimize the amount of water that we would have to put in that area.
Well, that's really encouraging, because yes, there's a ditch usually on the side of the road, right?
Or a pipe.
Yeah, that's a conveyance for that water. So that's good. That are you continuing those talks with Bonita Springs, or are you staying engaged at this point?
We hope to be able to have some additional conversations through our quarterly coordination meetings. And we're going to continue to stay engaged, and hopefully we can come to terms and maybe get them to the table for some sort of agreement that also includes the flowway CDD and those other folks who have interest within that easement area, because perhaps if we can all get together with the city of Bonita Springs staff, maybe we can iron out these issues. And hopefully if we iron out those issues, maybe the district would then be more amenable to operating the pumps.
Okay, well, I'm really encouraged by that report. And if there's anything we can do, as you know, we're partners in all of this as well. So appreciate that. Thank you for the update. Anything else for Akeen at this point? Thank you very much, Akeen. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, the next discussion item that we have on our agenda today is the proposed bus shelter within the Henderson Creek right-of-way. And we've got Rich Virgil with an update on this for us.
Good
Hi, Rich,
afternoon.
welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. Mouse. Rich Virgil, I am the Field Operations Director for the South Florida Water Management District, under which the right-of-way department is housed. So Collier County is requesting a permit to install a bus shelter in the Henderson Creek right-of-way. As you know, under our agreement with Collier County, the district's agreement with Collier County, canals within the basin are designated through the governing board as works of the district. As works of the district, those canal rights-of-way are managed under the criteria manual. The reason why we're here today is that proposed improvements within 40 feet at the top of the bank of the canal must obtain a waiver of the rule. I should go back one just quickly. I'm sorry. And just, here, yeah, I just wanted to go over the location map quickly, which I didn't cover. So the proposed location here is at the intersection of Collier Boulevard and Sable Palm Road. And as you know, the Henderson Creek Canal parallels Collier Boulevard. So under the district's right-of-way criteria manual, it requires that above-ground improvements must be a minimum of 40 feet from the top of the bank. And that rule is based on the need for an unobstructed area for district or basin vehicles and equipment to perform maintenance. So in this situation, the Basin field station has determined that 28 feet would be sufficient for the basin to perform their maintenance work within the Henderson Creek right of way in this location. So here's a detailed site plan of the proposed improvement with the bus shelter here in the blue. It also includes a trash receptacle and a above ground bike rack. So features that are above ground that propose could block access are the requirements for the waiver. There's other features that are going to be within this permit, which is sidewalks and guardrail and a relocation of the light. These items do not require the waiver, but will be within the permit. So due to the site conditions at this location, which is the Sable Palm Road, there's limited right of way along that road and there's a roadside ditch. There's really no other proposed alternate location for the bus shelter. And also, this is, considered to be a benefit to the public transit users. The Basin's Service Center has reached out to Collier County, the appropriate departments, to get concurrence and approval to move forward with the project, which they have. Granting the waiver is not going to have any adverse impacts to the Basin District ability to perform routine or emergency maintenance. And then again, this application will go before the district's governing board for approval in September. There's a nice picture of the typical Collier County bus shelter within the right of way that's proposed. Any comments, any questions? Pretty straightforward.
Board members, anything? Is there any public comment on this item?
We have no registered comment and no hands raised on Zoom.
I just have one comment. Rich, I just want to thank you and your team for working on this. I know it was a long time coming. I drive past this area every day when I leave the island, and that's a very popular place for folks to use Collier County Transit. So the bus shelter is going to be a welcome improvement for that area. Really will. Thank you for working this out.
Thank you for your support.
Okay, the next item is the fiscal year 2022-23 budget presentation with Candy Heater.
Good afternoon. Today's presentation, the objective is to finalize the millage for the basin as well as the budget to receive approvals from the Basin Board. Starting with the first topic of discussion is the millage rate. The millage rate is to be discussed, before discussing the budget. The millage rate that is proposed is the same millage rate that was approved at the July board meeting. That millage rate is 0.0978 mils. It is the rolled back rate. It is a reduced rate of 0.0138 mils. Translated to $100,000 of taxable value, that's $9.78 per $100,000 of taxable value and $1.38 savings from the prior year. An example that we put on the slide is a homeowner with a home value of $500,000. An estimated payment would be $48.90. And we also laid out a few examples of some of the services that $48.90 that the taxpayer receives from the Basin. Those being flood protection, capital infrastructure improvements, canal maintenance, vegetation removal, water supply, and modeling and ecosystem restoration. Now moving on to the second topic of discussion is the budget. The budget of $14,475,308 is the same as what was approved at the July meeting. There's no change. It is a balanced budget, revenues and expenditures. 6 funding sources on the revenue side, with Avalon being the largest at 11.5 million, or 79% of the revenue funding the budget. And then the uses, largest portion, being a flood control operations at 3.6 million, as well as capital infrastructure investment at 4.1 million. A little additional information is a breakdown of who is responsible for accomplishing the work for the basin. So we took your budget and we sliced it up into the various divisions and what their responsibilities are to work on the work plan for the basin starting October 1. Those being as follows: administrative services at about 129,000. That's dominantly your facilities and general services group. They're responsible for the service center maintenance and supporting Lisa and her team on their grounds. Also, district headquarters control room, water management oversight by working with Lisa's team as well for water management. The next group being Big Cypress Basin Service Center, Lisa's area at 2.7 million. They're responsible for all the agreements, outreach and communication, basin water management, as well as modeling. Ecosystem restoration and capital projects, that is your modeling, that is your engineering team at 5.3 million. They're responsible for administering all the contracts, oversight of your capital infrastructure project, as well as the modeling. Flood operations division, field operations division, excuse me. That's the field station, 3.2 million. They're responsible for all things network related to the canals, the water control structures, all operations and maintenance. Information technology, all IT, all things IT, including the SCADA group, who is responsible for the SCADA telemetry system. Real estate and land management division, 400,000, responsible for the crew lands management. And then your reserves, fees, and charges at 2.4 million. That includes your $2 million emergency reserves, as well as property appraiser and tax collector fees and self-insurance. The next steps after today's meeting, and once receive approval from the Basin Board, the September 8th and September 20th public hearings will include the Basin's approved millage, as well as the Basin's budget for inclusion into the district's overall budget. So moving on to the first motion for approval, resolution of the Big Cypress Basin Board to approve the rolled back millage rate of 0.0978 mils for fiscal year 22-23, and requesting the governing board of South Florida Management District to levy ad valorem taxes within the Big Cypress Basin based on the rate to finance basin functions contained in the 22-23 fiscal year budget.
Are there any questions for Candy on the budget? Is there any public comment?
No, ma'am. We have no registered comment and no hands raised.
Okay, thank you, Troy. I appreciate it. That being said, we have two motions. We'll have to do the millage rate motion first and followed by the actual budget. And I'll ask for a motion and a second on resolution BCBB 2022-0801. Could I have a motion, please?
Motion so moved.
We have to read the entire thing into the record, I believe.
I read the millage rate into the record,
Okay.
so we're good. Thank you.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hill, for the motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second, ma'am.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters seconds. So we'll go ahead and vote. Mr. Hill,
For.
Vice Chair Waters, Ms. Rivera,
I support it.
and I vote yes. So the result of the vote is unanimous. I'll need a motion now and a second to approve Resolution BCBB 2022-0802. This is our budget resolution. Could I have a motion, please?
I'll make the motion, ma'am.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters moves. Do I have a second? Ms. Rivera seconds the motion. We'll go ahead and vote. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
I vote yes. Mr. Hill? And Ms. Rivera?
Support it.
Okay, so that motion passes unanimously as well. Thank you, Candy.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to our first opportunity for any board comment. Do any board members have comments at this time? No comments?
Covered already.
All right, well, we got a ways to go. All right, then we'll go into the technical reports with our first technical report, which is Field Station Activity Report by Paul Class. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Ms. Hi, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, and board members. I'm Paul Classy, the Supervisor for Structures and Canal Levy at the BCB Field Station, and I will be presenting the Big Cypress Basin Field Station Activity Report. For the overview, we will be talking about maintenance activities, remedy tracking status, and the 3 months outlook. For canal maintenance, one of our biggest challenges this time of the year is keeping up with our canal maintenance. Our canals are so shallow and we have temperature, water flow, and early rainfalls. Our vegetation just explodes like every year. As we can see on the left side picture, one stretch of the canal, small stretch of canal, where we can see the canal full of vegetation. Where we have rented an equipment, trucks and machine shown in the middle picture, machine that have become really beneficial for the field station because they allow us to maintain those small stretch of canal where we have limited access. Reason why the district already ordered one and purchased one, I'm sorry, and we expecting to receive it at the beginning of next year. On the right side picture, we got our trash truck operated by Dre, removing vegetation from the banks. On Miller Canal, similar situation, a larger canal. And you can see on the left side picture, vegetation on the top of the canal. And we can spot a little bit of the submerged vegetation in between. In intention to reduce the chemical applications on the canals, we have implemented more mechanical harvesting to the process. And proof of that is we're showing a picture of our convert boat operated by, I'm sorry, Umberto, with cutting attachments, as you can see in the front of the equipment, that can cut the top and bottom vegetation that after cut, it will float, and it's showing on the right side picture. All that vegetation floating to the south where we install some turbidity curtains or barriers so we can retain that vegetation and easy removal. In the process, we removed 25 truckloads of vegetation over the 2 weeks period. On the left side picture, we can see equipment placing vegetations on the banks. Middle picture, trash truck operated by Juan, removing vegetation from the banks. And on the right side picture, we showing a canal status after removal, after a great effort and teamwork. In continuation and planning for our weekly maintenance, we have to schedule some vegetation removal and debris removal for our structures and tough booms. And proof of that is pictures of operator Dre removing vegetations from the structure I-75-1. For maintenance activities, On the left side, we have technician Michael replacing gearbox and motor from one of our gates on the structure FU5. And on the right side, we have Michael also with technician Juan checking connectivities on electrical accessories on control panel on the structure FU5 as well. For the 3 months outlook, we will continue with the mechanical harvesting and batch management to secure that our canals are ready for any storm event. We will continue to support the wet operations changes, orders. And for our structure, we will continue with our preventive maintenance and repairs to secure that our structures are operational for any wet event. For the remedy tracking status, we had 1 call for bank erosion, 1 call for debris in the canal, 2 calls for vehicles in the canal, and 1 for flooding. We all the challenges that we're facing, we managed to only just receive 1 call for flooding, so. And for the comprehensive Everglade restoration projects, the activity report, for pump station, we graded 5 miles of the levees and the roads of the Picayune Strand as part of the agreement with Forestry Division. On the left side, we have equipment grading the roads, and on the right side, we got a map of area grading. For Mary and Faca Pump Station, we continue to pump in 24 hours, 7 days a week. And on Mary Pump Station, pump shaft replacement has been completed on 1 of them, 2 remaining that we are expecting to be completed on the next dry season. For the 3 months outlook, we're gonna continue supporting the wet season pump orders changes and the preventive maintenance and repairs to ensure that our inspections to ensure that our pumps are operational and at full capacity for any emergency. Any questions?
Board members, are there any questions for Paul?
I have a question for Paul. If you could, looking at the vegetation in the canal system as a whole, if you could give me a grade as to where you stand in terms of the where you need to remove vegetation, is it like 5%, 10%? Just roughly.
I mean, it varies, depends on the time of the year, like this season, it's always explode, like I mentioned, because of the high temperature, but we always have to stretch that we have bigger challenges and we got big canals. You know, the first picture that I showed was small canals where we face basically challenges on access because of the space that we have there. On the big canals, on this season, what we try to implement is a lot of more big mechanical harvesting. And basically in the rate, we can say that in control, we're in a pretty good status, but still we're facing a lot of challenges.
So you need a couple more of those, that machine that you showed us that the district's getting, you need like 5 more of those? Or?
Well, I think that we're gonna start with 1 and see how it goes.
Okay, all right, that helps me, that answers my question.
Yeah, that was interesting to me too, because if all the canals were 100%, how much do you have remaining to have to clear, or is it continual?
It's continuous, and again, it's areas that have more and all the areas that are easier to manage. But if it's, I mean, there's some areas that we actually have to bring any help or extra help or contract, you know, and stuff like that.
If you could ask the board for anything to do your job and to make it more efficient and more productive, is there anything that you would ask us for?
I will say in the future will be personnel.
Personnel? Because you're running short?
Well, because as we go, we're facing more challenges and stuff, and that way we can cover more areas of the canals. I will say that in the future, that will be one of the points that we can look at.
Attracting more personnel?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Paul?
Yes.
Ms. Rivera, sorry.
I have 2 questions. This mechanical harvesting, you show on the pictures a variety of pieces of equipment. The depth of these canals, what what range do you operate in from couple feet to how deep?
Well, it depends on the water flow, because those equipment that you see, like the first one that we just purchased, that's a really beneficial equipment because it has tracks. So basically, we don't need that much water flow or water level. But for Converge and Towboat, we actually need some water to flow, so that way the equipment can access the canals.
And how deep can you operate? 8 feet, or is it only a couple, 5 feet?
Well, I mean, the impellers that we have under the equipment, it goes like maybe like a good 4 feet under the equipment. So it basically helps to cut the submerged vegetation.
Super. And we discussed this before, this debris that you pick up that right now we dispose of it. Are there other parts of the country, or either Florida or the United States, Louisiana or some other areas where they have this level of raking and debris that's produced? And do you know what potentially other areas of the country are doing with their materials?
I really don't have that information with me. I haven't actually studied or reached out to any other agency for it, because as far as us, right now, we haven't faced much issues with the vegetation. I mean, we face a lot of challenges sometimes of the years, but we remove it. And sometimes we actually get some people interested on keeping some of that, but the vegetation sometimes mixed with a lot of debris. So it kind of makes it harder for them to be interested. So, but that will be something that we can look moving forward, just to see other procedures that they do.
And within the South Florida Water Management District, I'm sure Miami and other areas have to harvest. Are we the worst, or do we fall on average, or
I
where?
would not say the worst. I mean, as you can see on the table of complaint, we haven't got many for the county. So I think that we pretty much balance it out.
Oh, I don't mean worse in performance. I mean, do we have the largest volume of vegetation per canals that we harvest, or other areas of the South Florida Water Management District having to deal with a lot of?
So I quite didn't understand the question. What is it that you're trying to
Our volume of harvesting, is it one of the highest volumes?
I haven't made that comparison with other fuel stations, but it's quite there, because sometimes we face areas like from the big canals that we have to remove, as I showed, 25 loads of vegetation. So it kind of, sometimes they get kind of high in the high rate.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Right, maybe Rich, you could answer that question for us. I think the question, if you come up to the mic, is whether or not BCB removes comparable amount of vegetation or more vegetation than other places that you see throughout the South Florida Water Management District canals.
I would say, like, percentage wise, because of the size of the basin, it is one of the highest out of the 8 field stations for submerged aquatic vegetation. You know, many of the other canals within the district are very large and very deep. The larger and deeper the canal, the less submerged aquatic vegetation growth you get. So we do have an area in Miami-Dade County that what we call the C100 series canals, where they're smaller and shallower, and we have the same challenges in that area as we do here in the basin, and we use similar techniques to remove the vegetation there as we do here. They don't tend to fluctuate in elevation as much as the basin canals do, because sometimes the basin canals get right down to the point where they're dry and then fluctuate as much as 8 to 10 feet. So percentage wise, it's very high for the basin compared to the rest of the district, but we do face the same challenges in other areas. When you get into the larger canals that are deeper, what we face there is floating vegetation that grows, like water hyacinth, water lettuce, and that type of thing that breaks free and grows from the sides and then accumulates at structures, and we have to do either mechanical or herbicide treatments for removal, and it's a challenge. That's our challenge in the other locations.
Oh, that's very interesting. So I think that was your question.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rich, for that information. And thank you, Paul, for your excellent presentation today.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, Brad Jackson for the water conditions report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Again, Brad Jackson, I'm the BCB Basin engineer. I'm here to talk about the water conditions since our last board meeting in early July. So I'll just kind of jump right in here. As I normally start off, I've got a rainfall summary for the year to date so far. As I mentioned last month, we started the wet season off above average. That trend has changed for us here in the basin along with the rest of the district. But overall, with the below average last month we've had and above average, pretty much falling in right where we should be, about 105% of normal for this time of year. So things are looking good on the rainfall front for us. So step back and look at July, kind of where did we get rainfall, where did we not? There's a few basins that got a higher than normal average rainfall and some areas that got below. Some of the Henderson Creek and southern Collier County got above average rainfall with upwards of 13 inches in places. And then really it was pretty well distributed across the basin with areas of around 9-inch average pretty much everywhere. So there really wasn't a hot spot. We didn't have any events that really made anything stand out. So overall, a pretty typical July for us. Look forward to August here. This only goes through a couple days ago with a lot of the Saharan dust that's come off of Africa. It's kept our conditions a little drier than normal. So we really transitioned from wetter to really almost 60% of normal for August. So far, we've only got about 4.5 inches this month. Like I said, it's about 60% of normal. There are a few key spots in southern Picayune and Picayune Strand Restoration. And again, in Henderson Creek, they got above average, but nothing significant and noteworthy, above or really that far out of normal. So overall, I'll mention more in the forecast. I suspect we might make up some of this deficit, at least in the basin, before the rest of the month is over. So here, just looking at the water year, this starts our year in May 1st, when we kind of reset the clock on when we start accumulating or counting the water for our year. Remember back, we started about 2 weeks early in May. We normally start around Labor Day. We started mid-May this time. And then in July, we had the 13-inch above average rainfall. That was mostly due to the early season potential tropical cyclone we had. Like I mentioned, August has been 60% of normal so far. So that's the rainfall. What does the conditions look like on the ground inside of our canals? What does our system look like? On the left side of the screen, you'll see a lot of greens and blacks. That's pretty much, I can kind of talk about that a little bit. The green areas, that's basically our normal range where we want to be for the middle of August. That's basically balancing water conservation and flood control operations. We've been drier than normal, but we're still ready for upcoming rainfall so we can still react and have room in the system. You do see the black areas, which indicate above normal. Those are areas that are more inland, where we've had some upgrades, like looking at Picune, looking at Corkscrew, towards in the middle of the screen where my cursor is, and then on the eastern side of the county or the system. Those are areas where we want to keep a little bit more water, even in the wet season. With some of the new structural upgrades we have, we're able to react faster to rainfall that hits on the ground and move that water through the system. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. And then if we look on the right side of the screen, this talks about with our indicator wells for the Corkscrew area. In general, we're right where we should be with the average rainfall. So there's really nothing too noteworthy there. They're not really too far above or below average from what we can tell. So now I'll stair step through the system very quickly. Look here first at our Golden Gate main. Again, start on the left side of the screen. That's our coastal outfall that corresponds to the GG1 here on the bottom of the chart on the right. So normally you'd want to be somewhere in this blue band when we're kind of in the wetter conditions. You can see some spikes here in August. Like I mentioned, we were in drier times. We were seeing below average rainfall. So in response to that, we did increase some of the operational ranges throughout the county to help conserve water. So we were promoting groundwater recharge and not losing that water, just in case the wet season didn't pan out. The rest of the wet season didn't pan out. So, but since then, we've been able to bring things back to normal. We've got rainfall in the forecast again that I'll hit on. Moving up north a little bit, this is the Cocohatchee Canal here. So the purple line is our coastal outfall. We're right in terms of normal. We've had a few changes here and there, but nothing really out of the ordinary. And then at the Coco 3, which is near the middle of that canal system, we're pretty much right near average as well. So plenty of capacity left in the system to take any additional rainfall that comes our way. Move over to Picayune, and I won't spend much time here, but the similar story, we're able to, on the right side of the screen, maintain water levels higher than we have in the historic time, just because of the operational flexibility we have with the systems now and having the remote operations that we have inside these structures. So it helps us hold that water in the freshland or upland areas. And then down south a little bit further over Henderson Creek, similar story. Conditions are normal and water levels are not too far off from average. We're pretty much in the green band, which is our kind of middle 50% where we want the water levels to be. So now I'll spend a little bit of time talking about Picayune Strand project operations. This chart here on the left, or the table on the left here, this is Picayune Pump Station. This is the one that just came online last wet season, but this is the first wet season we've had the entire year to pump. So really the area of influence where that water is able to spread out now until the project is fully complete is approximately this blue shaded area. And that's about 6,200 acres. So since the wet season started on May 1st, we've pumped about 31,000 acre feet of water through this one pump station that's spread out over this region. You can see on the bottom right, that's our daily pumping. So you can see we really haven't turned off the pumps once since June 1st. They've been going nonstop. If you would try to look at how much water that really is, 31,000 acre feet sounds like a lot of water. If you basically took the city of Naples and took about 2/3 of it and flooded it with water, you would get, a couple feet of water over that much of the city. That's to try and give you some basis of how much water that really is and the size of the restoration that we're able to do there. So it's really pretty nice to see this year. It's been definitely interesting for me to look at this daily and see the change in the system. Then the same thing, I don't have the blue area on this. This is our Merritt pump station, the first one that was online. This one's been running for quite a few years, but this year we've moved 26,000 acre feet. And it's obviously mixed in and moved its way south through the Picayune restoration water as well. So overall, that's almost 50,000 acre feet of water or so. That's almost half of what we would normally release out of GG1 in a whole year. So already.
Great.
And then to finish off here with the Picayune, this is just a little bit of a drone flight. This is our spreader basin just this last month. We tried to get out there to see water flowing all of the discharge weirs. And you can see on the left side of the screen, that's the outfall portion. So you can see how much water is really stacked up in, that's sheet flowing. It wasn't just over that where the old canal used to be. It really is sheet flow everywhere at this point. So
I'm looking forward to my visit next week to take a look. So
yeah.
Great.
So we'll look quickly at groundwater. Since we have been a little drier than normal, like I said, we were holding water a little bit higher than normal to try and help with conservation of water through parts of August. The groundwater for our region is a little bit lower than normal, but we're still in the peak of wet season with more rain to come. So the levels aren't necessarily concerning. They are a little bit lower than where you would normally see this time of year for Collier County, but nothing really that's concerning at this point. So I won't spend too much time there. Looking forward to the rest of the wet season and then to the dry season. There's really not, the chances are kind of equal on which way the rain or drought may go. We don't really know which one we'll get for the next few months, but dry season does look like we may have a continuing La Nina, which would then possibly promote drier than normal conditions. So we may look at how we balance and get into the water conservation mode and make sure we can conserve every drop of water that's in the system before the wet season comes to a close. And so that leads me a little bit to the hurricane season. It's end of August here. So what this graph kind of shows here is just kind of the average number of hurricanes, the climatology of the hurricane energy in the Atlantic. So you can kind of see we're pretty much here. We've got the marker here, and we still got a ways to go until we hit the peak of the season and the end of or the middle of September. So just wanted to highlight this. The peak of the season is coming. The system's looking good. Paul and the field station's doing an awesome job keeping the system cleaned out of vegetation, which helps make sure the system can perform its peak capacity. So the current conditions, I'll just spend a couple minutes here. The tropics have been fairly quiet up until recently, thanks to, in part, the dry Saharan dust layer that's come across. It's kind of designated by the yellows and reds through the area here. But it is late August, so we would expect to see some flurry of activity. These are just the tropical waves that they're currently being monitored throughout the Atlantic at this point. So there is some activity. These aren't necessarily storms or anything, but there are things that we are beginning to monitor more closely as the season progresses. And then in the short term, I mentioned that we might have a change in the below average rainfall to the normal or above average rainfall. So the focus of the rainfall, at least for the district in South Florida, will be back on our side of the coast for the next 7 days. So it should help make up some of the August deficit we've seen. And then on the bottom right, we do have a couple areas of interest for the tropics. The National Hurricane Center does have a few areas that may indicate some development in the next few days. So of course, we'll keep an eye out on these and make sure the system's ready to go in case anything does develop. I'll close there and happy to answer any questions.
Board members, any questions for Brad?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Brad, I noticed that this year the storms have been further south and end up hitting more of the Yucatan before they enter the Gulf area. Is that due to an unusual amount of high pressure further north, or why the shift south versus other years that tend to come up more the east coast of the United States?
Without sounding too much like a meteorologist, which isn't my area, but in essence, we're just now getting into the peak of the season. There's been not much activity anywhere. There hasn't been a named storm, and I forget the number of days now. I don't know the exact reason why we haven't seen any come up towards the Gulf of Mexico, but I don't think there's been a named storm since July, like 50 some odd days. I know the Saharan dust and a lot of the wind shear does play into that, but that's kind of the limit of my knowledge. If you need more information, I'll be happy to get you in touch with the right folks.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Brad? Brad, thank you very much for your excellent report. The one question I would have is right now out at the Picayune Strand, you gave us the acreage for the FACA Union pump, but in total, do you have that figure of the total acreage that we have in a sheet flow status?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I can get that for you.
Okay, great. That'll be super.
I can get that for you next time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, the next item is our staff reports, which is our Basin Administrator's Report. Lisa?
Thank you. There was a couple times as Brad was talking, I thought he was going to steal my thunder.
I did too.
I was like, well, I'm not going to have anything to say now. So what Brad alluded to a couple of times in his presentation was the remote control operations going on and how he's able to respond very quickly to water levels. And I don't always get to stand up and give good news, but today's the day. So what you see on the screen are a few of the new structures that have been built with SCADA equipment, monitoring wells, and new gate refurbishment. And what that does for us is if you look at the map, that arrow that's following the path of the canal series, we can now move water, remote controlled, operated from Shady Hollow Road all the way down to Naples Bay without calling on staff to come out on the weekends and the evenings. That whole system runs independently by itself. But if there is a high rain event, Brad, through communications, West Palm Beach, can issue an order and those gates will open within minutes. The other huge part about this is we are now operating the canal system in inches versus feet. Years ago with these structures, we had boards on them, 18-inch boards. So you order to take a board off or 2 boards off. And now he can open up that gate 2 inches, 3 inches. So we're releasing less water downstream to Naples Bay in our estuary. And we're also able to hold it back faster, as he talked about moving quickly into dry season if we need to do that in the end of September, where before our field station crews would have to go out and spend days in battening up the structures. Now we can close it all up in just a matter of minutes. And so we're able to protect our groundwater supplies, but we're also protecting our estuary and Naples Bay. We're improving our level of service to the citizens of Collier County, and we're just really proud.
That's a great news story. I really appreciate how your graphic shows us what we've accomplished with all of the capital projects that we've had and the SCADA improvements and everything over the years, not just this board, but the previous boards. As we go forward, are we looking at another leg of this? Can you kind of highlight that with your cursor, the next leg?
Absolutely. And there are. So what I didn't tell you is this path is about $13 million of your capital planning that you have worked on since 2015 with 2 new structures, 5 structures that were retrofitted. You've got 14 monitoring wells that have been installed, gate sensors, and a lot of work that our electrician has done here at the field station. And that's just this component. Overall, your investment has been about 20 million so far with your remote control operations. We have also, let's see, where's my, sorry. There. The COCO system, COCO 1, 2, 3, and 4 are so the whole COCO system is also automated. Brad had a slide showing automation up in the FACA system here. We have finished the Cypress structure, but it is not it's not connected. Collier County Transportation is building the VBR extension, and through that road project, they will connect the canal. So then we will be able to also move water this way. So we'll have some greater options. The airport system is still manual. 951 is electrified. The team did that this summer, and they also electrified and put remote control ops at Henderson Creek on 951. So there's a lot of the system that we have greater control over, but this is by far the greatest with our 24 miles of canal.
That's just super. That has got to be such an incredible operational boost for all of the folks that work in this system. I mean, that's something to really be proud of. I mean, that really is. And hats off to you and your team and everyone who's worked on this for many years and the capital projects. Too bad Lucinee's not here, right? In order for us to.
A big thank you to Lucinee for helping drive this as well. She's been working on this with me from the very beginning. There's been so many people involved,
Sure.
Whether it's SCADA, the field station, our water managers. It's been a great project, and we're really pleased that we have so much of it done.
It's great. Are there any questions for Lisa? Great report. Really
Thank
great.
you.
Go ahead, Nana.
last time we talked about a tower that,
Yes.
can you tell us what that tower is going to influence on?
So it really helps with that northern part of the system going all the way over to Cocoa One. So we have the FACA Union Tower that's down in Picayune Strand that helps us with our communications in the southern half of the system. But the tower that's going in up at Lake Trafford that helps with the communications in that northern part.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That it? Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Okay, Candy Heater for the monthly financial report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The monthly financial report that you all have in your package is through the month of June 30th. Right now, you have collected recurring revenue, new revenue, 11.413, so $11,413,000 out of $11,403 budgeted. So we've collected 10,000 additional. Right now, your ad valorem is lagging compared to last year about 1%. I'm not too concerned with that right now. So right now, the ad valorem budget was 11,233,000 and you've collected 11,214,000. So we meet next week on the July financials, and I'll be able to see if that's been caught up or not. But I foresee that that'll be caught up in August, if not the postings in July. Your expenditures, you have 78.5% of your budget obligated. That's actually very good. There's about 4.7 remaining for expenditure, but that includes your 2 million reserve. And we still have several pay periods to go through. So that's normal to have some money left over. So that's concludes my report. There's no red flags to really report on other than the taxes.
Okay, what questions for Candy? Candy, I want to take this opportunity to thank you and your entire staff for all of the great work that you have done on the budget. I missed this earlier in the budget, but it's appropriate here as well because you keep up with our budget month in and month out and every penny. And I'm sure there's a lot of conversations behind the scenes that we're never privy to, that you're working with Lisa, and your whole team is just stellar in my view. And Julie, it's great to have you here for our meetings. And I really, really appreciate everything that you contribute to this board. And I'm sure the whole board feels the same way when we have our meetings and we know our budget's in good hands. So thank you very, very much for your great support. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And we truly appreciate those words. Thank you.
Okay, this is our general public comment period for members of the public who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone who wants to speak, Troy?
Madam Chair, no registrants in the room. One hand raised on Zoom. Mike Elfenbein.
Okay, great.
Mike, you've been prompted. There you are. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. Madam Chairwoman, what an awesome meeting. So 2 things I wanted to say is, one, the most important, which is you're just fantastic. And I told you that before, but I want everybody to know how amazing you are and how engaged you are. And if there's ever an opportunity to create a bronze statue of you somewhere to acknowledge the amount of effort that you've put in to our environmental causes, I'd like to champion that. And then to your fellow board member that inquired about the vegetation and what you do with it in Picayune, ma'am, I'd like to invite you to come out and see a new technology that has found a way to repurpose those materials and reapply them to the landscape for not only a benefit to the landscape, the wildlife and conservation efforts, but also the opportunity to sequester carbon into the earth and work towards resiliency and mitigating some of the issues with climate change. So if you're interested, we are doing a project on Lake Okeechobee currently being funded by FWC and the DEP to remove aquatic vegetation and take it a step further in completing the cycle and repurposing those nutrients that vegetation holds so that it's not left on a disposal site and those nutrients don't return back to the receiving waters. So if you're interested, I'd be glad to show you that. Lisa and Charlotte both have my contact information, and I'd love the opportunity to share that with you and any of the other members of the Big Cypress Basin. And if I still have a couple more minutes, I'd just like to put in everybody's minds the issues that we're facing with Western Everglades restoration and the placement of an STA on some of the most valuable, ecologically valuable lands in Southwest Florida. I know that Chairwoman Roman has been more than engaged in this issue, but I just want to make sure that it's on everybody else's radar. I hear these environmental organizations discussing some of these other projects, but I haven't heard them step up to this one. So I don't know if it's because they're not aware of it, but I just want to make sure that it was stated publicly that there are some concerns with WERP, and I'd love to see them resolved so that we can continue forward with Everglades restoration. Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, there are no other hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you, Troy. That brings us to our final board comment. Are there any comments by the board? Ann? Andy? Nanette? Okay, well, I have just a couple of things, and one is I want to thank Troy, who's normally behind the scenes running the whole TV program for our board meetings, who is now in the room with us and did just an expert job at public comment today, Troy. It's clear you're a professional of the highest caliber, so appreciate it. You run the TV, you can do everything, and thank you so much for the support today. I'd also like to thank the board members, Nanette, Andy, and Dan. It takes a lot, to keep up with all these complex issues. And most of us are not water managers, but we certainly get engaged, and the decision-making is so important. And I just wanted to thank you for your dedication and your professional support of the Big Cypress Basin, because it means a lot. Thank you so much. It makes my job easy. So I appreciate that. And also, I'd like to thank the district staff who travels from the East Coast to come here for these meetings and gives outstanding support no matter what the time frame is. I mean, you can pick up a phone and call one of the district supervisors and get them, and they'll get an answer right back to you. So I really appreciate that support. And also, last but not least, the district's, the Basin staff, who's day in and day out keeping this place running, providing outstanding service to Collier County. And then, as you saw from our meeting today, keeping up with the issues that we have before us as a board. So I want to thank you all very, very much for your incredible professional support for the Basin Board. And with that, thank you for participating, and I'll adjourn the meeting. Our next meeting is October 27th. Thank you.